Start new scene. The flap to the weaponsmith tent opens as Zero steps in. He walks to the counter and sets a sheet of paper on the counter with a light stump. Old one, I need a submachine gun. Or an auto rifle. Here is the schematics you can use to build it. And following the instructions to make the adapter to my sword. Tell me what you need and I will bring it. The weaponsmith looked up from his workbench, his single optical sensor narrowing as he regarded Zero. The tent was cluttered with half-built weapons, scavenged machine parts, and the constant smell of oil and ozone. He wiped his hands on a greasy rag, his expression a mix of skepticism and grudging respect. He leaned over the counter, peering at the schematic Zero had provided. His mechanical fingers traced the lines with a craftsman's eye. HMPH. Fancy drawings, he grunted, his voice a low rumble. Clean lines. Good weight distribution in the design. But this ain't no pipe rifle, stranger. This requires precision tooling, high-grade alloys, stable energy conduits. He straightened up, crossing his arms over his broad chassis. I can build the frame. The firing mechanism, maybe. But this power cell interface? He tapped the diagram where Zero's Z-Saber would connect. That's alien tech. My forge can't synthesize those materials. You need to provide the core components yourself. Machine cores won't cut it this time. You're talking about YorHa grade energy regulation systems. He looked from the schematic to Zero's impassive helmet. You planning to start a private war? This isn't for hunting small fry machines. This is for putting down something big. Something that fights back with its own artillery. He paused, his sensor dimming slightly in thought. You bring me the guts, the core, the wiring, the stable plasma chamber, and I'll hammer the rest into shape. But it won't be quiet, and it won't be subtle. You start spraying rounds from this. Every machine for 5 clicks will know your location. He pushed the schematic back toward Zero. You understand the trade. You get firepower. You lose stealth, and you'll need to feed it. This thing will chew through energy cells like a Goliath through scrap. His tone wasn't disapproving, just brutally practical. So, you still want it? Were you gonna stick with the beam sword and prayer method? Zero leans in, a serious expression in him. Stealth was never my strong suit. And my motives? I will end this war completely. Maybe my appearance in this era was for a reason. So I need the equipment needed for it, even if I have to rip it from YorHa's hands. The weaponsmith's optical sensor brightened, then dimmed again slowly. He stared at Zero for a long, silent moment, the hum of his internal processors almost audible in the still air of the tent. The casual, almost casual declaration ripped from YorHa's hands hung between them like a lit fuse. Finally, the old android let out a low, grinding sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. End the war, he repeated, his voice dry. Big words from a man who walks in here asking for a bigger gun. He leaned forward, both hands planted on the counter. But I've seen you work. I've seen what's left when you're done. He gestured vaguely in the direction of the factory ruins. So I'll believe the ambition. The means, though. He snatched the schematic back up, studying it with renewed intensity. YorHa grade components. You're talking about raiding their supply convoys, their forward depots, maybe even a down flight unit. He looked at Zero, his single lens gleaming. That's not just picking a fight. That's declaring war on the army itself. They don't take kindly to scavengers, especially not scavengers who can turn their own gear against them. He rubbed his chin with a grimy hand. The adapter for your sword I can maybe forge from the Goliath core you brought. It's dense, energy reactive. But the rifle's heart, the receiver of the magnetic acceleration rails, the high-yield energy cell you'll need to pull that from something YorHa made. He slid the schematic into a drawer beneath the counter. Bring me the pieces. I'll build your gun. But you bring that heat down on this camp, and the only thing I'll be forging is your name on a memorial plaque. His tone wasn't hostile, just weary. He'd seen too many bold plans end in scrap, metal, and black box signals going silent. You want to end the war? Start by not getting this slot ended first. He waved a hand toward the camp outside. Now, you want a shopping list? Or are you just gonna go knock on the bunker's front door? Outside the tent, leaning against a rusted support beam shrouded in shadow, Tui listened. Her audio receptors, finely tuned, had captured every word. The weaponsmith's skepticism, Zero's cold resolve, ripped from YorHa's hands. Zero pulls back. You can be sure I will not involve this camp in this feud. If YorHa has any complaints, they can bring it directly to me. He says coldly, and if I perish in the process, Well, won't be the first time. I will return regardless. Always have, always will. Zero turns around and begins to make way to the entrance. I will return with the parts needed. Have your tools ready. The weaponsmith watched Zero's retreating back, his single lens flickering. Crazy bastard, he muttered under his breath, but there was a thread of something like awe in the static of his voice. He looked down at the schematic now hidden in his drawer, then out at the camp full of androids just trying to survive another cycle. Shaking his head, he turned back to his forge, the fires within stoked a little higher. He had a feeling he'd need the heat. In the shadows, 2E remained motionless, a statue of black and white. Zero's words echoed in her mind. I will return regardless. The absolute certainty in that statement was its own kind of weapon. He wasn't boasting. He was stating a fact of his existence. Her internal systems hummed, correlating data. YorHa's supply convoys followed predictable routes between the bunkers, orbital drops, and established forward operating bases. Forward depots were more heavily guarded but had higher grade material. A downed flight unit that was a potential treasure trove, but locating one that hadn't been completely scavenged or destroyed would be difficult. Pod. She pulsed on the secure channel. Pod 042, listening. Access local resistance comm traffic. Filter for any reports of recent YorHa aerial activity, especially unscheduled drops or casualty events. Prioritize anything within 200 kilometers. Pod 042, compiling. 3 relevant signals detected in the past 48 hours. 1 transport shuttle reported engine trouble over the flooded city sector. 1 flight unit of unknown model reported lost contact during a routine patrol in the eastern desert zone. 1 heavy supply convoy is scheduled for surface deployment at 0400 tomorrow, grid sector Delta 7. The eastern desert zone. Isolated. A lost flight unit meant possible salvage before command could recover it. It was a start. 2E peeled herself from the shadows, moving with silent grace away from the smith's tent, her mind already constructing a plan. Zero would be the spearhead, drawing YorHa's gaze with his demands and his defiance. She would be the ghost, sifting through the data he stirred up, locating the precise component they needed. And when the time came to take it, they would do so with surgical precision. The executioner and the hunter. Their war against the war had begun. Later on, Zero joins with 2E, his expression neutral. He looks at her eyes and nods. I can sense you have a plan. Debrief me. 2E stood at the edge of the camp, where the twisted wreckage of the old world gave way to the barren expanse beyond. She watched Zero approach, his crimson form a stark contrast to the muted grays and browns of the ruins. He stopped before her, his helmeted gaze meeting her uncovered eyes directly. Affirmative, she stated, her voice low and devoid of its earlier turbulence. It was the calm, clipped tone of a soldier delivering a mission brief. YorHa's logistical network has predictable weaknesses. I've identified a high-value target. She turned slightly, gesturing with a gloved hand toward the vast, shimmering haze of the eastern horizon. A YorHa flight unit, model designation Angel, reported lost contact during a routine patrol over the eastern desert zone 40 hours ago. Standard recovery protocol indicates a salvage team would have been dispatched within 6 hours of the loss of signal. She looked back at Zero, her blue-gray eyes sharp. The team failed to report in. Command logged the unit and team as MIA, presumed destroyed. No further recovery attempts have been scheduled. Priority has shifted to other sectors. A faint, cold smile touched her lips. A bureaucratic oversight, or, more likely, an assessment that the area is too high risk for valuable recovery assets. The desert is plagued by severe electrostatic sandstorms and aggressive, evolved machine lifeforms that interfere with long-range scans. She paused, letting the implications settle. The flight unit itself is a Grade A class designed for heavy assault. Its primary energy core, magnetic rail systems, and plasma containment chamber are exactly the grade of components required for your weapon. More importantly, her voice dropped another degree. Its onboard black box and navigation matrix will contain encrypted data on recent YorHa deployment patterns, supply routes, and possibly bunker security protocols. She crossed her arms. The plan is simple. We infiltrate the crash site, secure the core components, and extract. The environmental hazards and machine presence will provide natural cover from orbital surveillance. Our primary opposition will be local machine life forms and any automated defense systems still active on the wreckage. Her gaze was unwavering. I will provide navigation and tactical oversight by pod. You will provide the primary combat solution. Once the components are secured, we disengage immediately. We do not engage YorHa forces directly unless compromised. Speed and silence are our advantages. She finally tilted her head, a slight, questioning motion. The risk is significant. The desert is unforgiving, and we will be operating far from support. But the potential gain is worth the operational cost. Do you concur? Pod 042 floated silently nearby, its single eye a steady, unblinking red light. Assessment. Probability of mission success increases by 34% with Unit Zero's participation. Warning. Detection by YorHa forces will result in immediate designation as hostiles. Counter strategy advisable. Confirmed. Zero replied as he begins to march out the camp expecting 2E and Pod to follow. I will draw YorHa's attention to me if anything happens. But what about survivors? If we find any. 2E fell into step beside him, her movements a seamless match to his purposeful stride. Pod 042 glided silently a few meters behind, a silent sentinel. Survivors complicate the objective, she stated, her voice cool and analytical as they moved beyond the camp's perimeter into the skeletal ruins. Standard YorHa protocol for MIA units presumes loss after 48 hours without contact. However, flight units are equipped with emergency survival pods. If a pilot ejected prior to impact, they may be alive but stranded. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Their loyalty is to command. Their first action upon contact would be to report our presence and activity. There is security risk. She looked ahead, toward the vast, shimmering expanse of the eastern desert. The logical course of action is neutralization. To preserve operational secrecy. The words were delivered flatly, the old programming of the executioner surfacing in the clinical assessment. But there was no relish in it, only a grim acceptance of necessity. She paused for a beat, the only sound the crunch of gravel under their boots. However, she continued, her voice lowering slightly, neutralization does not require termination. Their communication systems will be damaged or inoperative due to the storm interference. We can disable them. Leave them for a later, official recovery team. It introduces a variable, but a manageable one. She finally looked at him directly. The choice in the field will be yours. You will have the tactical advantage. But understand, any survivor we allow to live is a potential witness. A data point that can be used to trace us. Pod 042I glowed. Addition, the black box data is the primary target. A surviving pilot may have attempted to purge or destroy the core memory unit. Immediate seizure of the flight recorder is recommended to prevent data loss. 2B gave a slight nod. Pod is correct. The data is the priority. Survivors are a secondary concern. Deal with them as the situation dictates. Her tone left no doubt about the preferred method, but she had, deliberately, given him the agency. It was a subtle shift in their dynamic she planned, he executed, and part of execution was judgment. Just make it quick, she added, almost as an afterthought, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The desert does not forgive hesitation. Zero listens as he walks. If X was here, you would have opted to help the survivors and try to negotiate a deal that everyone wins. However, your logic also has weight. We will focus on the flight unit. If we find any survivors, we neutralize them to silence, but not retirement. That at least X would approve. He always was too humane. But it's not my style. I am a destroyer, not a savior. X. The name was new data. A reference point from his past, a ghost of a different philosophy. 2E filed it away, her mind automatically categorizing it. Possible former ally. Humanitarian ideation. Contrast to Zero's operational pragmatism. Understood, she replied, her voice neutral. The choice was made, the parameters set. Neutralize, not retire. A distinction with a moral difference she noted but did not dwell on. Her own history was a ledger written in final, permanent terms. The crunch of their footsteps on the broken earth was the only sound for a long moment as they left the last vestiges of the camp behind. The landscape ahead began to slope into the arid rolling dunes of the eastern desert's outskirts, the air already growing drier, carrying a faint metallic tang of ozone. A destroyer, she echoed, her gaze scanning the horizon for the first signs of the electrostatic disturbances. And a savior are not mutually exclusive. One can destroy a system to save what it imprisons. She glanced at him sidelong. Your ex sought negotiation. My experience is that systems built on lies do not negotiate. They purge anomalies. She stopped at the crest of a low ridge, the vast, shimmering expanse of the desert stretching before them like a sea of burning gold. In the far distance, flickering sheets of violet lightning danced between the dunes, the telltale sign of the sandstorms. Our objective isn't there, she said, nodding toward the maelstrom. The storm will mask our approach and degrade YorHa's sensor coverage. It will also test our integrity fields. Stay close to Pod. Its shield can be tuned to deflect the worst of the particulate abrasion and energy discharge. She turned to face him fully, the howling wind from the desert pulling at her hair and skirt. Once we enter the storm zone, comms will be unreliable. Visual signals only. We move fast, secure the core, and extract. Do not engage machines unless absolutely necessary. The storm does our work for us. A final, assessing look. This is the point of no return, Zero. Beyond this ridge, we are officially enemies of YorHa. Her expression was impassive, but her newly revealed eyes held a glint of that cold, settled resolve. Are you prepared? Pod 042 floated beside her, its eye glowing a steady crimson. Environmental hazard alert. Electrostatic sandstorm density exceeding safe thresholds for standard YorHa chassis integrity. Shielding at maximum. Proceed with caution. 2E didn't wait for a grand affirmation. She simply turned and began descending the ridge toward the swirling, electric gold hellscape, her form quickly becoming a stark silhouette against the raging light. The path was chosen. The lie was the target. And the desert awaited. Mission time. Desert region. Not many know how this region became from rich in vegetation to mere desert. Some speculate that since the Earth stopped rotating and the Moon and Sun just are stationary, this area is being hit directly to the sun rays, creating a dry landscape that first turned into a wasteland and then into a desert. Many machine life forms hide among the sand, like worms swimming on the golden dust of dryness and dirt, waiting to ambush those that comes close, like antlions waiting for prey to fall on their hole. Many androids fell to the guerrilla surprise attacks. Many fell to unfortunate fate. Other the sand was too much and clogged their filters. However, things just changed. Regional desert, open field, sand triangle theme. A sudden explosion of massive size erupts from the open field. Sand and parts of a large machine life form flies everywhere. From among the wreckage, Zero emerges. He rushes at high speeds, hack and slashing machines popping from the sand left and right, his calibration to desert operations active. She ran on the sand as if he was running on water like a ninja. He quickly rushes in, dash jumping to gain altitude, spins in the air, and then stabs down his Z-Saber, skewering a large type machine on the center of the head. He pulls the Z-Saber and jumps back just in time. This one explodes. As he sails in the air, he is being met by a barrage of energy shots. He begins to swing his sword all around with high speeds, parrying the shots away, some of the shots being reflected back to the machine, using their own weapons against them, destroying them before he lands on the sand. Another squadron of machines emerges. Zero stares at them. These machines seems different. They were not acting like the machine life forms from the city ruins. These ones seems more primitive, more stupid. As they seem not to cower in fear, but attack like berserkers. Perhaps a new tactic the central network is trying, but once more proven useless. Zero straightens, saber in hand, as his body begins to flash. Energy begins charging as waves of particles and solar plasma begins to be absorbed. The energy begins to be focused on the Z-Saber. Zero then sprung, charging at high speeds, dash jump, and then holds the sword with two hands. Genbu Zero, he cries, smashing the sword to the ground, creating an explosion of energy that smashes into several of the squadron units, hacking them apart. 2E observed the distant conflagration from the relative shelter of a sandstone outcrop, the howling wind whipping at her skirt and hair. Pod 042 hovered beside her, its shield deflecting the worst of the stinging, electrically charged sand. Analysis. Subject Zero's combat efficiency exceeds all known parameters for machine entity engagement in this environment. Pod droned, its single eye tracking the bursts of energy and flying debris. Local machine behavioral patterns indicate a shift to attrition-based swarm tactics. Ineffective. 2E said nothing. Her uncovered eyes, narrowed against the grid, followed Zero's movements with cold, professional appraisal. The explosion of the large machine, the effortless deflection of energy fire, the devastating area of effect technique Genbu Zero that cleared the field. He was a force of nature, a scalpel of pure destruction cutting through the desert's defenses. The machine's mindless aggression was indeed a new variable, but as Pod stated, an ineffective one against such overwhelming superiority. As the last echoes of the explosion died, replaced by the moan of the wind and the crackle of dying machine cores, she pushed off from the rock. Confirmed, she stated, her voice clear through their private channel despite the storm. Primary resistance neutralized. The path to the estimated crash coordinates is clear for approximately 400 meters. Advancing. She moved with silent, fluid grace, her boots barely leaving impressions in the shifting sand. Ha drifted ahead, scanning. Warning. Residual electrostatic discharge and plasma fallout saturating the immediate area. Advised to circumvent the primary blast zone. 2E altered her course slightly, skirting the edge of the smoldering crater Zero had created. The sand here was vitrified into jagged glass, and the air hummed with unstable energy. She glanced at the scattered, twitching remains of the machine squadron. Primitive. Berserker. A blunt instrument thrown against a precision blade. It spoke of an uproar desperate, or one testing a new, expendable template. As she reached the far edge of the devastation, she paused, looking back toward where Zero stood amidst the ruin. He was a crimson splotch against the golden, storm-washed waste, utterly still now, surveying his work. Pod, scan for the flight unit's transponder signal. Focus on the low-frequency emergency band. The storm will have degraded it, but it should still be emitting. Pod 042, scanning. Signal detected. Bearing 022, range approximately 600 meters. Signal is weak and intermittent, consistent with storm interference and possible structural damage. A vector appeared on her internal display. She turned, her gaze locking on the direction. 0. She pulsed over the comms, her tone all business. Crash site located. 600 meters, bearing 022. Rendezvous on my position. We move in together from here. Expect possible automated defense systems still active on the wreckage. She didn't wait for confirmation. Copy. 0 responds. Taking a dash, leaving Ephraimage as the sudden acceleration gives him momentum for a large leap, coming out of the crater and then landing at 3-point stance landing before 2E with the heavy stomp. 0 slowly stands and turns to the direction. Let's go. And then he sprung once more, rushing towards the appointed destination. Acknowledged. 2E responded, her own systems already priming for rapid advance. He was a blur of crimson motion, a shockwave of controlled violence cutting through the storm's fury. She didn't try to match his raw speed. Her role was precision, not power. Pod, maintain close proximity and full active scanning. Prioritize identification of any energy signatures consistent with YorHa automated sentry protocols. She moved, a streak of black and white flowing over the glass sand and into the undulating dunes beyond. Her gait was a low, efficient sprint, every motion calculated to conserve energy while maintaining maximum agility. The storm screamed around them, reducing visibility to 100 meters of swirling, electric-tinted gold. Pod 042. Warning. Multiple subsurface vibrations detected ahead. Pattern inconsistent with natural seismic activity. Hypothesis. Burrowed machine life forms lying in ambush. Understood. 2E said, her voice calm. 0 will clear the path. Maintain scan for the wreckage structural outline. True to prediction, as 0 surged ahead, the sand ahead of him erupted. A quartet of serpentine, drill-headed machines burst from the dunes, their maws lined with grinding teeth, aiming to intercept his charge. They moved with surprising speed for their size. 2E didn't break stride. She watched as Zero's form seemed to blur, his Z-saber becoming a disk of light. He didn't evade. He met the ambush head-on, a series of brutal, efficient slashes that disemboweled the first two before they could fully emerge. The third was bisected vertically. The fourth managed to snap at his leg, only for its jaws to shatter against his armored calf before he brought his saber down in a finishing arc. He didn't pause. He was a force of nature, plowing through the desert's defenses like they were paper. Pod, has the wreckage signal stabilized? Pod 042, affirmative. Signal strength increasing. Visual confirmation now possible. Through the veils of sand, a dark, angular shape began to resolve. The down flight unit, a Gracie-class Angel, lay half buried in a dune, its sleek wings crumpled, its fuselage scarred by plasma burns and impact trauma. The cockpit canopy was shattered. No signs of immediate life. But as they closed within 200 meters, pod sensors pinged a new alert. Alert, multiple low-power energy signatures detected within the wreckage. Pattern matches YorHa standard automated sentry drones. They're dormant but registering movement triggers. 02E called over the channel, her voice sharp. The wreck is guarded. Automated sentries. Do not approach directly. I will draw their activation. You destroy them. We need the core chamber intact. She didn't wait for a debate. Darting to the side, she broke from his wake, angling toward the angel's exposed, mangled engine nacelle. As she closed in, a series of hatches on the wreck's spine slid open with a hiss of compressed gas. 6 compact, spherical drones emerged, their single red optics scanning and immediately locking onto her as the primary threat. Perfect. Zero's body begins to change color as it turns into an orange-gold hue, then suddenly his speed doubles, sprinting at high speeds. And as soon as he crossed the flight unit, a series of flashes happen as Zero lands on the other side, holding his sword dramatically, his body changing back to normal colors. Then the Senti splits in pieces. Zero deactivates his saber and slowly raises to his feet. Tui didn't waste a moment on spectacle. The instant the last drone casing hit the sand with a dull thud, she was moving. Efficient, she stated, her voice clipped over the comms as she sprinted past Zero's dramatic pose, heading straight for the shattered cockpit. But avoid using high-energy discharges near the core chamber. Risk of cascade failure. She vaulted onto the twisted fuselage, her boots finding purchase on the buckled armor plating. The storm howled around the wreck, sand scouring the metal. Pod 042 zipped ahead, its single eye scanning the torn open cockpit. Scanning. 2 life signs. Faint. YorHa signatures. Designation. Angel-class pilots. Both critically damaged. 2E dropped into the cockpit, her landing silent amidst the debris. 2 YorHa operatives, still in their black flight suits, were pinned under collapsed instrumentation. One was motionless, their visor dark. The other stirred weakly, a gloved hand twitching. Survivors, 2E reported, her tone devoid of emotion. She knelt beside the conscious one, her fingers going to the neck port. Neural feedback suggests catastrophic system failure. They won't last long. The operative's visor flickered, a distorted voice crackling out. Unit 2B? Report. Status. I am not 2B, 2E replied flatly. Her hand moved, not to offer comfort, but to the access panel on the operative's chest. Your flight recorder. Where is the data core? The operative's hand weakly batted at hers. Unauthorized. Access. Authorization is irrelevant, 2E said, her fingers prying the panel open with a soft click. Inside, amidst a tangle of ruptured conduits, a small, crystalline cube pulsed with a faint blue light the black box. She detached it cleanly. Your mission is over. Ours is just beginning. She stood, tucking the data core into a compartment on her thigh. She glanced at the other motionless operative. No signs of life. Protocol complete. Zero, she called out, turning her back on the dying pilot. The primary objective is in the rear compartment. Zero walks to the fallen pilots, his expression neutral. He remains quiet as he watches. Then his head looks over the shoulder to 2E. 2E, you said Command will send a rescue squad for them? But if they deactivate? Will the bodies be left stranded? 2E didn't look back at the dying operative. Her focus was on the twisted access hatch leading to the Angel's rear power compartment. Zero's question, however, hung in the charged air between them. Standard MIA protocol dictates a single recovery attempt, she stated, her voice flat, as she worked her fingertips into the warped seam of the hatch. If that attempt fails, or if the area is deemed too high risk for further asset retrieval, the units are logged as lost in action. Their memory data is archived from the last bunker sink. Their bodies are left as salvage. She applied pressure, the servos in her arms whining softly as the warped metal groaned and began to give. Given the environmental hazards and confirmed machine hostility in this sector, and the fact their flight unit's transponder will have gone permanently dark after we extract its core, the probability of a second recovery attempt is less than 3%. The hatch tore free with a shriek of tortured metal. She tossed it aside, revealing the dark, cavernous interior of the engine bay. The complex machinery within was scarred and dark, save for a central column where a pulsing, azure light throbbed weakly the primary energy core, partly damaged, but still intact. Command prioritizes operational continuity and resource conservation, she continued, her words clinical as she surveyed the core. 2 pilots in a flight unit are a significant loss, but not critical. They will cut their losses. She finally glanced over her shoulder, her blue-gray eyes meeting Zero's through the gloom of the cockpit. They always do. She turned back to the core, her hands moving with practiced precision as she began disengaging the magnetic lamps and fluid lines. Their fate is sealed. Ours is not. We have approximately 8 minutes before the core stabilization field fails due to external damage. We need it extracted before then. Pod 042 floated closer, extending delicate manipulation arms to assist. Warning: energy fluctuations increasing. Core integrity at 67% and declining. Recommend expedited extraction. The storm held outside, a fitting requiem for the 2 YorHa operatives breathing their last in the shattered cockpit behind them. Zero's gaze turns to the fallen operatives. So, they won't mind if we salvage them, then? 2E paused, her hands freezing for a fraction of a second on the power conduit she was disconnecting. The question wasn't about sentiment, it was about resource acquisition. She looked back at him, then at the 2 fallen operatives. Command will classify them as unrecoverable assets, she said, her tone analytical. Their components are YorHa standard, compatible with my own systems. Neural processors, photoreceptors, joint servos all higher grade than resistance surplus. She turned her head fully towards him, her expression unreadable. Salvaging them would provide spare parts for repairs and potential upgrades. It is efficient. She watched him for a long moment, the only sound the groan of the dying flight unit and the shriek of the sandstorm outside. But it is also desecration, she added, her voice lowering slightly. By their protocols. By any standard that isn't pure pragmatism. She returned to her work on the core, her movements brisk. The decision is yours. They are, for all operational purposes, already scrap. YorHa has written them off. We can choose to see them as a parts depot, or we can leave them as they are. It changes nothing for them. It changes something for us. Pod 042I glowed. Analysis. Retrieval of intact sensory clusters and processing units would increase operational efficiency by approximately 18%. Risk. Psychological impact on unit cohesion is unquantifiable. 2E didn't comment on Pod's assessment. She was simply presenting the variables. The choice, like the choice to spare or neutralize, was his. She was learning his parameters, the shape of his pragmatism. Would he cross the line? And if he did, what would it make them? Zero's eyes narrow. The Z-Saber's handle popped from his holster hatch as he slowly grabs it and turns it on. Beggars can't be choosers, he says softly. A human phrase he heard many times. They have limited resources and 2E needs spare parts for herself. These units are technically corpses. Desecration. Who would have thought that YorHa would also think of that as a human? But it is them, or the machines, who will scavenge the bodies. 2E. If this bothers you, I suggest you to focus on the flight unit. Then Zero spoke, his eyes growing cold as he walks to the fallen unit. The one still active, losing energy of life. Do not look this way. 2E's hands didn't falter on the energy core's housing, but for a split second her focus fractured. The soft, lethal snap hiss of the Z-Saber igniting was a punctuation mark in the storm's roar. His words, "Do not look this way," were not a suggestion. They were an order, a shield offered. She gave a sharp, single nod, her back to him, her gaze locked on the intricate wiring of the core chamber. "Understood," she said, her voice stripped of all inflection. She increased the magnification on her optical sensors, the world narrowing to the flow of energy, the alignment of magnetic rails, the precise torque needed for each connection. But she could still hear. The first sound was a crisp, surgical sizzle crunched the sound of a blade severing fortified alloy with pinpoint precision. Then the gentle, whining grind of servos being carefully disconnected. There was no violence in it, no rage. It was dispassionate, methodical. The sound of a craftsman salvaging components from a broken device. A faint, static-laced gasp, the last exhalation of the dying operative's power core was cut short by a softer, final click. 2E's jaw tightened. Her fingers, working with robotic precision, trembled for a microsecond before steadying. She was an executioner. She had ended lives with this same clinical detachment. But this was different. This was harvesting, turning a comrade, even an anonymous one, into a spare parts bin. Pod 042 floated silently beside her, its single eye observing the procedure. It offered no commentary. The act was, by its own logical parameters, efficient. Another series of precise, wet cuts. The sound of something being gently lifted, then placed into a containment pouch with a dull thud. 2E focused on the core. The stabilization field was at 42%. Her hands moved faster. Disengaged tertiary coupling. Reroute auxiliary power. Bypass the fractured feed line. The work was a lifeline, an anchor in a sea of grim necessity. Behind her, the sound ceased. The only noise was the relentless wind and the hum of the failing flight unit. A moment later, Zero's footsteps approached, calm and measured. He didn't speak. She didn't turn. He simply placed two small, sealed storage pouches on a relatively clean section of wreckage beside her. They were unmarked, but their shape suggested specific contents: a photoreceptor cluster, a neural interface processor. Salvage complete, he said, his voice as neutral as the desert air. The core? Extraction in progress, she replied, her voice tight. Stabilization field at 39%. Stand by. She didn't thank him. She didn't look at the pouches. She kept her eyes on her work, on the mission, on the lie they were tearing apart piece by piece, component by component. I've been considering that we should try to make our own refuge, close to the resistance camp, but not in their territory. Zero begins to speak as he starts to scan the flight unit for other resources he could use and salvage from it. That way we do not involve the resistance in this feud. 2E's hands didn't pause in their work, but her mind instantly cataloged the suggestion. A refuge. Not a camp, not a base of refuge. A place to plant, to store equipment, to operate from without dragging the resistance into YorHa's crosshairs. It was sound tactics. It was also an admission that this was now a long-term campaign. Agreed, she said, her voice low over the whine of the dying core systems. Proximity to the resistance camp allows for indirect supply and intelligence flow, but separation provides deniability and security. One final conduit hissed as she detached it. The core shifted loose in its housing. Pod, prepare containment field for transport. Pod 042, acknowledged. Stabilization field prepared. She carefully extracted the heavy, pulsing energy core, its azure light casting sharp shadows across her determined face. The desert outskirts provide numerous natural redoubts. Abandoned human era structures, geothermal caves, even machine burrows we can clear and repurpose. She handed the core to Pod, who enveloped it in a shimmering stasis bubble. We will need materials. Concealment. Power sources. Her eyes flicked to the two storage pouches he had salvaged. They lay beside her like an accusation. Her own repairs, her own upgrades, would now come from the bodies of those she was once sworn to protect. The irony was a cold knife in her gut. She turned to face him, the core secured, her expression a mask of cool efficiency. I will begin surveying potential locations once we return. We will need to move the components discreetly. The weaponsmith cannot be involved beyond the initial fabrication. She paused, her gaze lingering on the pouches. And we will need to integrate these. She gestured slightly with her chin. I have the necessary surgical protocols, but it will require time and a secure location. The words were clinical, but the subtext hung heavy between them. We are building something from the corpses of my past, from the lie I served. She looked back at the shattered cockpit, then out through the broken hull of the raging storm. This is the foundation, she said, almost to herself. Built from what they threw away. I am sorry if using parts of your past comrades bothers you. Zero speaks softly as he picks up the pouches. But you do not have YorHa anymore to do repairs on you. Only we have is the resistance mechanics, and normally they do not have the resources to keep you fully optimized. You need parts of your own kind. Zero begins to walk once they finish. Keeping you optimized is the best course of action. Because, for myself, there is nothing we have to repair any damage done for me, so I need you in your best condition. 2B was silent for a long moment, the only sound the relentless shriek of the sandstorm against the broken hull. His apology hung in the air, simple and stark. His logic was irrefutable. It was the same cold calculus that had governed her existence as 2E, optimized for mission success. Preserve the asset. But the asset was her, and the parts were from her kin. It doesn't bother me, she said, the lie smooth and automatic. She turned away from him, her focus on securing the final clamps around the stasis-held core in Pod's grasp. It is a tactical necessity. Sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. Her fingers tightened slightly on the housing. You need me in my best condition. The words were a statement of fact, not affection. A commander assessing his sole piece of viable equipment. And yet, in this barren, deceptive world, it was perhaps the closest thing to a pledge of mutual dependency she had ever heard. She looked at him, her blue-gray eyes reflecting the storm's chaotic light. Understood. My operational integrity is paramount to the objective. These components will serve that purpose. She gestured to the pouches in his hand. They are not comrades. They are casualties of a corrupt system. We are repurposing the wreckage. The words felt hollow even as she said them. A neat, logical box to put the horror in. But the box was thin, and the horror seeped through. Let's move, she said, her voice regaining its clipped, professional tone. The storm is intensifying, and we are exposed here. We have the primary objective. We will secure the rest of the usable material on a secondary pass once we have established our refuge. She didn't wait for his agreement. She turned and began moving toward the jagged hole they'd entered through, Pod gliding silently beside her with its precious cargo. The wind caught her skirt and hair, whipping them around her like banners of defiance. As she stepped out into the full fury of the desert, she glanced back once, not at Zero, but at the dark shape of the wrecked Angel, already being swallowed by the drifting sand. A tomb for two, a treasured trove for two others. The line between scavenger and savior had never felt thinner or more necessary. Pod 042, warning. Electrostatic interference spiking. Retreat advisable. Long-range scans indicate increased machine life form activity converging on this location. Hypothesis. Our engagement has drawn attention. Understood, 2E said, raising her voice over the gale. Zero, we have company. Time to go. The foundation is laid. Now we have to survive long enough to build on it. Sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. That phrase, 2E has mentioned it several times, and it bothers Zero. Then again, he himself was never good in expressing sentiments. That was X's area. X would not be in agreement with that statement. But Zero has no right to correct 2E either, as he himself has been cold and indifferent, even to those he cared. It was a way to cope, to endure, especially when comrades fell in battle. His eyes turned to the pouches. He was not heartless either. He felt bad for these people. But by the information 2E told him, their consciousness would be downloaded back into new bodies, so the impact won't be that big. Unlike reploids, when they were destroyed, that was it. No coming back. Such is the price of war. And Zero has seen it one too many times. Growing cold to the sentiment. When Pod warns about a possible hostility, his eyes once more snap forth, growing in alert. We are hauling cargo. We should take the prudent outcome. Try to avoid confrontation. Pod, calculate the best route which would bring us away from potential engagement. Understood. Pod 042 intoned, its eye glowing brighter as it processed the request. Calculating optimal egress vector. Warning. Machine swarm signatures are numerous and approaching from multiple vectors. Direct retreat to the resistance camp is no longer the most efficient path. 2E was already moving, her head on a swivel as she scanned the shimmering, storm-obscured horizon. She could hear it now, not just the wind, but the low, grinding hum of many legs churning through sand, the chittering of close-range machine communication. Sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. The phrase echoed in her mind, a mantra she had used to bury every uncomfortable feeling. Now, faced with the tangible cost of that philosophy, the pouches in Zero's hand, the core and Pod's field it rang hollow. But survival wasn't hollow. Pod's right, she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the storm's roar. A direct route back is compromised. They're hurting us. Her mind raced, overlaying the terrain map from her earlier scans with the new threat data. There's a canyon network, 2 clicks to the north-northwest. The rock formations will bottleneck them, and the overhangs will provide some cover from the storm and aerial surveillance. She looked at Zero, her eyes hard. It's a risk. The terrain is unstable, and we'll be moving blind into tunnels. But it's better than fighting a running battle across open dunes while carrying this. She nodded at the pulsing core. Pod 042, proposed route plotted. Estimated probability of evasion, 68%. Note, Canyon Network designated grotto on old maps. Sensor records indicate high mineral deposits may cause signal interference. Good enough, 2E snapped. Lead the way, Pod. Zero, you have the most firepower. You take rear guard. I'll cover the flank. We move fast and quiet. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Our priority is the cargo. She didn't wait for debate. She broke into a sprint, following Pod's streaking form as it darted northward, a red beacon in the ochre gloom. The whine of approaching machines grew louder, a rising tide of metallic hunger cresting the nearest dune. The race was on. Copy. Zero simply said, as he makes haste, following Pod into E. Soon enough they managed to find one of the many entrances. Zero walks in, still holding his cargo. The teal-colored gem in the forehead of his helmet glow as a sound impulse through his sonar waves through the long hallway, creating a sonar map in his mind for navigation. His HUD showing the mapping of the cavern, which he transferred to Pod, so he can relay to 2E. The map bloomed in her vision, a three-dimensional wireframe of the cavern system rendered in cool blue lines against the darkness. It was detailed, showing branching tunnels, unstable ceilings, and several larger chambers ahead, a significant tactical advantage. Received, 2E acknowledged, her voice a low murmur in the sudden quiet of the cavern entrance. The howl of the sandstorm diminished to a distant sight behind them, replaced by the drip of water and the deep, settling groan of ancient rock. Pod, cross-reference with geological scans. Identify the most stable path toward the northern exit, and flag any thermal or energy anomalies. Pod 042, cross-referencing. Path identified. Warning, several branching tunnels show signs of recent machine excavation. Residual energy signatures detected in chamber designated Alpha 3 500 meters ahead. Non-hostile pattern. Possible machine nest or cache. 2E's eyes narrowed. A cache could mean resources scrap, parts, possibly even intact power cells. It could also mean an ambush. We avoid it, she decided. Our load is sensitive, and we cannot risk a firefight in confined spaces. She glanced at Zero, his crimson form a stark contrast to the muted grays and browns of the cave. The map shows a narrower passage to the east. It's longer, but it bypasses the chamber entirely. We take that route. She moved forward, her boots making no sound on the damp stone. Her uncovered eyes, adapted for low-light combat, scanned the shadows ahead. The sonar map was indelible, but it couldn't show everything. It couldn't show the faint, bioluminescent fungi that clung to the walls, casting an eerie green glow. It couldn't show the slicks of oily moisture on the floor, or the distant, skittering sounds of cave-dwelling creatures that were not machines. The interference pod mentioned works both ways, she observed softly. It will mask our signatures from YorHa's orbital scans, but it will also degrade our own long-range communications. We are on our own down here. She paused at a junction, checking the map overlay against the physical reality of the three dark tunnels yawning before them. The eastern path was there, just as the map indicated a tight, winding corridor that smelled of damp earth and rust. Stay alert, she murmured, more to herself than to him. This is their territory now, and we are carrying a beacon. She hefted the core stasis unit slightly, its azure pulse the only light in the deep gloom besides the glow from their optics. It was a prize, and in the dark, everything hungry would be drawn to the light. Zero had been watching 2E all this time, remaining quiet, following along and doing as she informs. This was no time for inquiries. He needs to keep his guard up as they trek these chains of caverns. After several minutes of walk, we should seek a safe region to rest. If you begin to feel like taking a break. 2E paused, her hand resting against the cool, damp rock of the tunnel wall. She hadn't considered rest. Her systems were operating within acceptable parameters, elevated stress, certainly, but not critical. Yet, his suggestion wasn't about her limits. It was about prudence. They were hauling high-value, volatile cargo through unknown, potentially hostile territory. A misstep due to degraded focus could be catastrophic. You are correct, she conceded, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Optimal operational efficiency requires periodic recalibration, and the core stabilization field will benefit from a stationary period to equalize. She consulted the map overlay in her vision. There is a chamber ahead, 30 meters on the left. The sonar shows a single, narrow entrance in stable geology. It is defensible. She glanced back at him, her blue-gray eyes catching the faint pulse of the core's light. We secure the location, run system diagnostics, and then proceed. She didn't wait for his agreement, moving forward with purposeful strides. The indicated chamber was just as the map showed, a small, dome-like hollow in the rock, with one entrance barely wide enough for them to pass through single file. Inside, it was dry, the air still and cool. Pod, deploy perimeter sensors. Passive scan only, she ordered, setting the core's containment unit down gently against the far wall. The azure glow illuminated the chamber, casting long, dancing shadows. She then knelt, running a quick manual diagnostic on her joints and internal systems. A few minor stress alerts blinked away, nothing requiring immediate attention. She looked up at Zero, who had taken a position near the entrance, a silent sentinel. 15 minutes, she stated. Then we move. The longer we remain static, the greater the risk of detection. She leaned back against the rock, letting her systems idle, her senses still tuned to the cave's ambient sounds. The pouches of salvaged components lay between them, a silent testament to the cost of their new path. Fine by me. Zero speaks as he moves to the deepest part to have the entrance on his field of vision. My energy reserves are still intact, and I can recharge with solar energy, but you, on the other hand, need cells. You rest and conserve energy. I'll keep watch. 2E's gaze lingered on him for a moment, her expression unreadable in the low light. He was right, of course. Her power cells were finite, and the desert trek, the fight, the emotional turmoil it had drawn more from her reserves than a standard patrol. The cold, logical part of her acknowledged the necessity of conservation. The part of her that was still learning to be something other than a weapon chafed at the implied vulnerability. Understood, she said, her voice flat. She didn't lie down, didn't close her eyes. Instead, she settled into a low crouch, her back against the cool stone wall, facing the entrance opposite Zero. It was a resting stance, joints unlocked, systems in low power mode, but it was also a guard posture. She would rest, but she would not be unaware. Her eyes stayed open, fixed on the narrow tunnel mouth. The core's pulse provided a slow, rhythmic light. She could feel the slight drain on her cells, a quiet hum reminding her of her limits. Limits YorHa had engineered. Limits she was now forced to acknowledge and work around. 15 minutes, she repeated, more to herself than to him. Her hand drifted unconsciously to the storage pouches beside her, her fingers brushing the tough material. Spare parts. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She would need to integrate them soon. The process was clinical, automated. She had the schematics, the tools in pod. But the source of the parts. She pushed the thought away. Sentiment was a luxury. Fatigue was a liability. She focused on the sound of dripping water somewhere deep in the cave, the faint scrape of unseen creatures, the steady, silent presence of Zero at the entrance. He was a fixed point, a bastion. She was the adaptable weapon. This was their dynamic now. Her internal chronometer began its countdown. 14 minutes and 37 seconds of stillness, of waiting, of listening to the dark, and of knowing that when the time was up, they would move again, deeper into the unknown, building their rebellion one piece of scavenged wreckage at a time. Zero has been watching. He noticed the changes. His eye optics moves to the entrance for a moment, then back at 2E. 2E, he speaks softly. Listen, I am not good with sentiments. Never was. So, I am not the best person apt to speak to you or tell you otherwise, but... He pauses a moment, trying to gather his thoughts. I know this is bothering you. A pause. My friend, he once told me that talking can help ease one's anxieties a bit better, especially with someone one trusts. So, you can talk to me. Be honest with me. I will not judge you. The sound of her designation, too, in his voice, stripped of all operational coldness, was like a sudden pressure change in the chamber. Her head, which had been resting back against the stone, lifted slightly. Her eyes, fixed on the entrance, didn't waver, but her posture shifted minutely, a coil tightening. For a long moment, the only sounds were the drip of water and the soft hum of the core. His words hung in the damp air, an offer as unfamiliar and disarming as his earlier violence. She was silent for so long that the silence itself became its own answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, measured, but it lacked its usual clipped finality. It was the voice she used when thinking aloud, a rare and dangerous thing. It is not anxiety, she began, the word feeling alien in her mouth. It is calculation. Her gaze remained fixed on the dark tunnel mouth. A reassessment of variables. She finally looked away from the entrance, her eyes finding the two sealed pouches. The blue light from the core gleamed dully on their surfaces. I was built to execute, to eliminate targets deemed a threat to the system. The process was clean, detached, a function, a protocol. Her fingers, resting on her knees, curled slowly into loose fists. This, she said, gesturing faintly toward the pouches with her chin, is not clean. It is salvaging the remains of a function to sustain a new one. It is acknowledging that I, too, am a piece of machinery that can be stripped for parts. Thought my comrades were the same. She looked at him then, her blue-gray eyes holding his. The lie I served told me we fought for humanity. It gave the function a noble context, a reason. Now the context is gone. The function remains. I am dismantling the lie, but I am using its pieces to build what? Another machine? A better one. She exhaled a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. Talking does not change the calculation. It only makes the variables harder to ignore. She fell silent again, her confession hanging between them. It wasn't fear she was admitting to. It was the cold, isolating clarity of seeing herself and her entire world for what it truly was, interchangeable components in a broken, endless war. And the terrifying freedom of now having to choose what to build with the wreckage. Zero observes for a moment, in silence, just listening, and then when she finishes, he remains silent for a few more minutes. Then he speaks, voice soft, but neutral. Would it make you feel better if I discard the pouches then? Let them be buried? It was just a question for her opinion. Simple. Putting 2E's feelings first, before the specific needs. The question hung in the damp air, simple and devastating in its implication. He was offering to discard a tactical advantage, a resource critical to her operational integrity for the sake of a feeling. A variable he couldn't quantify. 2E stared at him, her systems momentarily stalled, caught in a logic loop with no clean exit. The cold, efficient part of her screamed no. The part that was still unraveling, the part that had touched the dying pilot's armor, felt a strange, tight pressure in her chest loosen. Her eyes flicked from his impassive face to the pouches, then back to the tunnel entrance, as if expecting a YorHa patrol to materialize and punish her for even considering it. Discarding them would be illogical, she said finally, her voice quieter than before. They are resources. We have none to spare. She paused, her jaw tightening. But burying them would also be inefficient. It would waste time and energy. She fell silent again, the conflict playing out across her features, a slight furrow in her brow, a tightening around her eyes. The coarse pulse seemed to mark the passage of this internal struggle. Keep one, she said at last, the words dragged from some place deeper than her tactical processors. The neural processor. It is the most versatile. The photoreceptor she trailed off, her gaze fixed on the pouch. Bury the photoreceptors. Let them see the darkness, instead of being used again. It was a compromise. A terrible, sentimental, human. Compromise between the machine she was built to be and the person she was trying to become. She didn't look at him as she said it, her face a mask of stoic resignation, as if admitting to a critical flaw in her design. She reached out, her movement stiff, and picked up one of the pouches, holding it for a moment before offering it to him. This one. Do with it as you see fit. It was an abdication of responsibility, and a profound act of trust. She was letting him choose to honor the dead or to use them. She was no longer certain which was right, only that the weight of the decision was suddenly too heavy to carry alone. Pod 04E2. Query. Is this an optimal reallocation of? Silence pod. She commanded internally, her voice breaking no argument even in her own mind. This is not your calculation. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of her unspoken turmoil. Zero's offer hung between them, a fragile bridge over the chasm of her disquiet. Her gaze remained fixed on the pulsating core, its azure light painting stark shadows across her face. Discarding them is not logical, she finally said, her voice a low murmur in the cavern stillness. They are resources. We have none to waste. She paused, her fingers tracing the seam of her glove. But burying them would consume time and energy we cannot afford. Another stretch of silence, broken only by the distant drip of water. Zero observes 2E still, in silence. Just letting her speak, letting her choose. Once she is done, his eyes turns to the pouch. His fist clenches around the area he was holding. The hatch on his thigh holster opens, the Z-Saber still popping out. Zero grabs the hilt and then begins to make way to a corner. He activates the saber, illuminating the cave with its light, and then he starts using it as a shovel to make a hole. Taking out the requested parts, but leaving the photoreceptors and other things, he let the bags drop on the hole. Then, with a kick, he breaks a part of dirt to cover the hole. Turning off the Z-Saber, he stores it back to his leg compartment and stands quietly looking at the hole. Logically speaking, this was a waste of important resources. 2E's conscience and feelings are more important to him than some spare parts. If this will ease 2E's heart, then so be it. 2E watched. She watched as the brilliant sunlight of the Z-Saber illuminated the rough cave wall, not in its usual lethal arcs, but in careful, deliberate strokes, digging into the compact earth. She watched as he lifted the pouch, not with ceremony, but with a quiet finality, and placed it in the small, dark hole. She watched the dirt cover it, sealing the photoreceptors the eyes of a fallen comrade into the eternal dark. It was illogical. It was a waste of resources. It was a vulnerability. And it felt, in some deep, uncalibrated part of her core, like a mercy. As he stood there, looking down at the freshly turned earth, the cave felt different. The hum of the core was still there, the drip of water, the cool air. But the weight of the pouches, the tangible, grisly cost of their survival was halved. One remained, a cold necessity. The other was at peace. She didn't thank him. Words felt inadequate, a currency too cheap for the value of the gesture. Instead, she slowly rose from her crouch, her movements less stiff than before. She walked over to where he stood, her steps silent on the stone. For a moment, she simply stood beside him, looking at the unmarked grave. Then, hesitantly, almost against her own volition, her gloved hand lifted. Not to touch him, but to hover near his armored forearm, a ghost of a gesture. Thank you, she whispered, the words foreign and fragile in the quiet. They weren't for the burial alone. They were for seeing the conflict, for offering the choice, for choosing her over the mission, just this once. Her hand fell back to her side. The moment passed, but the air between them had shifted. It was no longer just a tactical alliance. A line had been crossed in the dark, a line drawn not in logic, but in something far more perilous and profound. She took a steadying breath, the emotional calculus resetting. The 15 minutes are almost up, she said, her voice regaining some of its usual firmness, though it was softer around the edges. We should move. The remaining core components are priority. But as she turned to retrieve the energy core, her eyes lingered on the patch of disturbed earth one last time. A part of the lie laid to rest. A part of her, perhaps, laid to rest with it. She picked up the remaining pouch, the one with the neural processor. Its weight felt different now. Not a burden, but a tool. A choice. She looked at Zero, her blue-gray eyes clear in the coarse glow. Ready? Zero nods, and then goes to carry once again the hull of the flight unit and other salvage they got. He begins to walk towards the entrance, then stop. Chewie, I'm sorry, he said softly, for desecrating your comrade. Zero continues. He did not look at Chewie. His voice was softer than usual. You are more important to me than spare parts. If this makes you feel better, then it's fine. He finishes and resumes walking forth, not looking if she follows or not. Tui froze. The word hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. Sorry. An apology. Not for a tactical error, not for miscalculation, for understanding, for choosing her unease over cold utility. Her systems, always humming with background processes, seemed to stutter for a single disorienting cycle. The cave, the coarse pulse, the damp earth smell, all of it faded into a muted background hum. All that existed was the space between his words and her silence, and the raw, uncalculated weight of them. You are more important to me than spare parts. It wasn't a declaration of affection. It was a statement of value. A reassessment of the mission parameters where she was now the primary objective. It was the most devastating thing anyone had ever said to her, because it wasn't built on a lie. She stood utterly still, watching his crimson back as he moved toward the tunnel entrance, not looking back. He had offered the apology into the empty air, leaving her to do with it what she would. Accept it, reject it, analyze it into dust. Her hand, still holding the lone remaining pouch, tightened convulsively around it. The neural processor inside was a hard, unyielding lump. A piece of a dead soldier. A tool. You are more important. The calculation in her mind shattered and reformed, not with new variables, but with an entirely new equation. She didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, she turned her head and looked at the small mound of dirt in the corner. The buried photoreceptors. The offered piece. A single, quiet alert pinged in her vision. Emotional subsystem stress. 42%. Recommendation, recalibrate. She ignored it. Finally, she moved. Her steps were silent, but they carried a new determination. She walked past the grave, past the pulsating core pod held, and fell into step behind Zero, a few paces back. She didn't speak. There were no words calibrated for this. But as she followed him into the dark tunnel, the weight of the single pouch in her hand felt different. It was no longer a grim necessity pulled from a corpse. It was a gift. And the man walking ahead of her in the darkness, who valued her conscience over spare parts, was no longer just an ally. He was the reason. Time later, 2E and Zero managed to find the exit, coming out of the caverns and into the light. The solar rays hit Zero's body, and he can feel himself recharging his energies. Zero stands by the edge of a cliff. In the distance, he could see city ruins, the area in which the Resistance took refuge. The ruins of a pre-collapsed civilization. This area probably was the downtown area of a once flourished city. Zero stands in silence, surveilling the perimeter. The sunlight was a physical shock after the deep gloom of the caves. 2E stepped out behind Zero, her optical sensors automatically adjusting from low-light mode. The world resolved into stark contrasts: the brilliant, unforgiving sky, the endless expanse of gold and brown desert, and in the distance, the jagged, skeletal skyline of the city ruins. She stood beside him, silent for a long moment, letting her systems recalibrate to the open air. The wind here was cleaner, carrying the dry scent of dust and ancient decay. She followed his gaze toward the ruins, the supposed refuge that now felt like another kind of cage. Pod 042, alert. Long-range passive scan complete. No immediate YorHa signatures detected within 20-kilometer radius. However, residual machine lifeform activity patterns in the city ruins have increased by 18% since our departure. Caution advised. Noted, 2E murmured, her voice still carrying a faint rasp from the cave's damp air. Her eyes, now unprotected by the blindfold, scanned the horizon with a new, sharp clarity. The world was harsh, bright, and full of hidden threats. It felt more real than anything she'd ever seen through the visor. She glanced at Zero, his crimson armor drinking in the sunlight, a stark silhouette against the bleached sky. The memory of his apology, his actions in the cave, was a warm, unsettling anomaly in her tactical stream. She compartmentalized it, filed it under personal, pending analysis. Our immediate priority is to secure the components and establish a base of operations, she stated, her professional demeanor reasserting itself like a familiar armor. The Canyon network presented several defensible locations. We should survey them under full light, away from the electrostatic interference. She paused, her gaze drifting back to the distant ruins. But first, we need to move this, she said, nodding toward the energy core pod held. And we need to see what the weaponsmith can fabricate with the parts we did keep. Her hand brushed against the remaining pouch at her hip. The neural processor. A tool, not a ghost. She took a step closer to the cliff's edge, peering down at the treacherous slopes below. Pod, plot a course back to the resistance camp that avoids open dunes and minimizes machine patrol vectors. We'll use the rock formations for cover. She finally looked at Zero, the sunlight catching in her blue-gray eyes. The machines in the desert were different. More aggressive, less coordinated. The network is testing new behavioral patterns. At least the machines in the city ruins seems to keep their distance from me. Unless they also change somehow. Zero speaks. Let's just hope nothing has changed. With that, Zero jumps off, sliding down the cliff at descent speed until he reaches solid ground. Adjusting his haul, he continues to walk. 2E watched him descend the cliff with controlled, economical grace, a slide rather than a fall, his form cutting through the dusty air with practiced ease. He landed without a sound, a testament to his inhuman precision. She followed without hesitation, leaping from the ledge and angling her body to reduce wind resistance, her boots impacting the slope in a controlled skid that sent plumes of dust billowing around her ankles. She caught up to him swiftly, her movements silent beside his steady tread. Your assessment is likely correct, she replied, her voice low as they moved into the cover of the rocky foothills. The machines in the city ruins are older models, operating on established behavioral algorithms. The desert units exhibited signs of accelerated evolutionary pressure, perhaps a localized network experiment. She kept her senses tuned to their surroundings, her uncovered eyes scanning every shadow, every shift in the light. The memory of the berserker swarms was fresh. Hope is not a viable tactical variable, she added, a touch of her old dryness returning. We must assume the network is adaptive. Every engagement provides a data. Our methods must evolve faster. Pod 042 glided ahead, its scan sweeping the path. Alert, energy signature from the core is emitting low-frequency radiation. While minimal, prolonged exposure in open terrain increases detection risk by 12%. Recommend expedited return. Understood, 2E said, picking up her pace. We'll take the southern ravine route. It's longer but offers better cover from overhead scans. She glanced at Zero, noting the way he carried the salvaged components. No strain, no complaint, just relentless forward motion. Once we deliver these to the smith, we need to scout the canyon system for a secure location. Somewhere with thermal masking, defensible approaches, and if possible, a secondary escape route. Her mind was already working, overlaying maps and probabilities. The buried pouch was a quiet weight in her memory, but the remaining one at her hip was a tangible reminder of their needs. Needs she was now prioritizing alongside something she had no name for, a variable that logged as trust and value in a subsystem she'd never fully accessed before. For now, she said, her voice firming back into its command tone, speed is our ally. The longer we linger between here and camp, the more we roll the dice. She moved ahead slightly, taking point, her every sense alert for the telltale signs of grinding metal or chittering machine speech. The desert might have been behind them, but the war was everywhere. Copy. With that, Zero begins to accelerate his step, going on a faster jog to make haste. You think the canyon would be better than finding a room in one of the deserted buildings? Zero asks as he jogs. 2E matched his accelerated pace effortlessly, her stride eating up the ground with silent efficiency. The question was practical, tactical. It helped ground her. Deserted buildings are predictable, she replied, her voice steady despite the increased exertion. They are the first places scavengers machine and android alike will loot. They offer multiple points of entry and egress, which is an advantage for us, but also for any pursuer. Their structural integrity is often compromised, and they are easily visible from the air. She vaulted over a fallen pillar, landing without breaking rhythm. The canyon network offers natural concealment. The rock walls provide thermal and sensor shielding. Entry points can be bottlenecked and fortified. The electrostatic interference that plagues the desert still lingers in the deeper passages, which will degrade enemy scanning. She glanced at him as they ran side by side. It lacks infrastructure. No power, no pre-existing shelter. But we can build that. We can control it. A building, she shook her head slightly. A building is a place someone else made. A canyon is a fortress we make for ourselves. The distinction felt important. They weren't looking for a hiding place. They were looking for a foundation. Something built from their own choices, not the ruins of the old world. Pod 042. Additional analysis. Abandoned structures within the city ruins show a 73% probability of hidden machine nests or ambush points. Canyon systems show only 22% probability due to limited resources attracting fauna. Exactly, 2E said. We trade convenience for security. And right now, security is our primary currency. Her mind was already sketching layouts. A narrow entrance widened just enough for them. A high vantage point for pod sensors, a concealed rear tunnel for emergencies. A place to store the core, to work on the weapon, to exist outside of YorHa's shadow. It will not be comfortable, she added, a hint of dry acknowledgement in her tone. But it will be ours. The word ours slipped out, uncalculated. She didn't retract it. Copy. Once we deliver the resources, we then scout the canyon. I doubt the gun will be ready today. Understood. 2E replied, her voice flattening back into pure professionalism as they neared the camp's outer perimeter. The emotional vertigo of the cave was compartmentalized, locked away behind layers of focus. The fabrication process will take time. The smith will need to calibrate his tools to the energy signatures of the core and adapt his techniques to the glide glass material. A day, at minimum. They slipped between two rusted husks of pre-war vehicles, the familiar scent of ozone, oil, and dust signaling their return to the Resistance's territory. She slowed her pace, motioning for caution as they approached the more populated areas. We will deliver the components, secure his discretion, and then depart immediately for reconnaissance. The less time we spend in camp, the lower the risk of drawing unwanted attention. She glanced at him, her uncovered eyes scanning the makeshift pathways ahead. We should enter through the eastern scrap gate. It's less frequented by the regular patrols. Her hand rested briefly on the pouch at her hip. The neural processor felt heavier than it should. Not a burden of guilt anymore, but a weight of responsibility. It was a tool for her survival, given by someone who valued that survival above all else. As they moved into the shadow of the camp's outer wall, her expression grew guarded, the open vulnerability of the cave replaced by the wary awareness of a soldier in potentially hostile territory. The mission parameters had shifted again. They were no longer just salvagers. They were builders. and builders needed a place to lay the first stone, far from prying eyes. Zero could see the secret hallways to the area of the resistance base in the distance. "We're almost there," he says as he picks up the pace. "Do you think it will be necessary to raid the other supply points? Or would it be not necessary anymore?" 2E matched his increased pace, her mind already analyzing the new variable he'd introduced. Raiding other supply points. It was the logical next step in escalation. "It will become necessary," she stated, her voice low as they navigated the final stretch of broken terrain toward the hidden entrance. "The core and the Goliath parts will facilitate one weapon, perhaps some basic repairs. But for sustained operations, power generation, communication equipment, fabrication tools, medical supplies, we will require more than desert salvage." They reached the concealed opening in the camp's perimeter, a gap in the rusted plating known only to scouts and those who wished to come and go unseen. She paused, scanning the interior for any observers before slipping through. Once inside the relative gloom of the cluttered maintenance alley, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "YorHa's forward depots are the primary targets. They contain high-grade materials, but they are also the most heavily guarded. The risk of direct confrontation with YorHa forces increases exponentially with each incursion." She led the way through the familiar maze of scrap metal corridors, her movements silent and sure. The deserted factory you cleared presented another opportunity. Its secondary storage areas may still contain usable machine core components and raw materials, less guarded but of lower quality. She stopped just before the turn that would lead to the weaponsmith's tent, turning to face him. Her blue-gray eyes were serious in the dim light. "The decision hinges on two factors: our immediate needs after the canyon is secured, and how much attention Commander White is willing to tolerate before she deploys something more definitive than standard patrols." She glanced down at the salvaged core pod carried. "We have taken her flight unit. If we take more, we move from being a nuisance to being a priority target. We must choose our raids carefully, and we must be prepared to vanish completely afterward." Her gaze met his. "But yes, to build a refuge, to wage a war against the war, we will need to steal from the army that made us." The admission held no pride, only cold certainty. "It is the only way." "Well, if your commander has any complaints, she can talk to me directly about it." Zero replied, slight snarl. Not towards 2E, but towards White. "He finds her annoying." "Speaking of, do you think they are yet to realize you deserted?" 2E's expression tightened almost imperceptibly at the mention of Commander White. The snarl in his voice resonated with her own buried resentment, a silent agreement that needed no words. "They know," she said, her voice flat and certain. "The moment I defied the order to detain you, my status was flagged. The moment I removed my visor and left the camp with you, the desertion was logged. Operator 6O," she paused, a faint tension narrowing her eyes. "My assigned operator. She will have been instructed to sever the command link. My access to the bunker network, to mission logs, to communications, all of it has been revoked by now." She glanced down at her own hands, clad in their stark white and black gloves, as if they might already be marked. "They will not broadcast it. Disciplinary actions within YorHa are quiet, efficient. They will list me as missing in action during a routine patrol, a tragic loss. Then they will dispatch an executioner unit of 2E, like I was, to locate and retire me. Permanently." A cold, mirthless smile touched her lips. "The irony is not lost on me." She looked back toward the direction of the weaponsmith's tent, her gaze sharpening with renewed focus. "But they will not move openly, not yet. You are an unknown variable of significant power. Disrupting the resistance camp or creating a scene risks exposing their lives to the general android population. For now, their moves will be shadows. Covert surveillance, probing attacks. They will test our capabilities, gather data, and then they will strike to eliminate us both with maximal efficiency and minimal witnesses." She met his eyes, her own now clear and hardened like quartz. "So, to answer your question, yes, they know. And the clock is ticking. Every component we secure, every piece of intel we gather, every bolt in our refuge advises another hour against that clock." She turned to lead the way toward the smith. "Let's make this delivery count." Zero narrowed his eyes. One aspect of her intel rebounds on his thoughts. "All right. So what are the chances we face a replica of yourself, which has your memories up to the point you met me?" The question hit her with the force of a physical blow, freezing her mid-step. Her breath, a purely mechanical function, caught in her systems for a single, jarring second. She turned her head slowly to look at him, her blue-gray eyes wide with a horror that was utterly, chillingly logical. Hi, she breathed, the word scraping out of her. The probability is unacceptably high. She leaned against the cold metal wall of the alley, the reality of it settling in her core like ice. All YorHa units have continuous memory upload to the bunker servers when in range. Backups are maintained. When a unit is lost, a new body can be printed and the most recent stable memory data implanted. Her hands, usually so steady, flexed at her sides. My last full sync was before I entered the underground facility where I found you. They have everything. My combat data, my personality matrices, my voice, my face, my techniques. The last word came out strained. She pushed off the wall, her voice dropping to a vehement whisper. But they won't send me. They'll send an E-model and executioner loaded with my combat programming up to that point. It will look like me. It will move like me. It will know how I fight. She met his gaze, her eyes blazing with a cold fury. But it won't have met you. It won't have buried those components in a cave. It won't have she trailed off, the unsaid things hanging between them, the trust, the choice, the apology in the dark. It will be a hollow shell. A weapon wearing my skin, programmed with one directive. To erase the anomaly. To erase us. She took a sharp, steadying breath, forcing the panic back down into the cold, analytical place where she functioned. It is their standard procedure for dealing with rogue assets. Efficient. Psychological. It is meant to break the will of anyone who might be allied with the deserter. Her lips twisted. It never worked on me when I was the one sent. I wonder if it will work on me now that I am the target. She straightened up, the moment of visceral horror mastered once more under layers of grim resolve. So yes, the chances are high. And when it comes, we cannot hesitate. You cannot afford to see my face and pause. And her voice hardened. I cannot afford to see my own face and falter. It will be the most dangerous enemy we have faced yet. Zero states as he stops after noticing 2E stops. He slowly turns to face 2E. If you ask me, if I was Commander White, I would be smart enough to send another numeral Type B that does not resemble you. He pauses. My logic is because if they send a replica, in a sense it's still you. Same thought processing. Same logic. It may question your reasons for desertion. And if you make sense, she being another you, may start to understand. Even if she does not have memories of me, her sentiments will not be the same. But she is still you, in a sense. So she may be able to understand, and that may compromise the mission for her. 2E stared at him, her analytical mind seizing on his suggestion and dissecting it with brutal efficiency. The ice in her veins thawed into a different, sharper chill, the chill of a terrible possibility. You're right, she said, her voice slow and taut. That would be the smarter play. Send another E-model. One with a different face, a different numeral. A clean, uncompromised weapon with no emotional baggage to interfere with the mission. She began to pace a short, tight line in the confined space of the alley, her movements sharp with agitated energy. But you're also wrong about one thing. She stopped and looked at him, her eyes haunted. They don't have my sentiments. Not the ones that matter. The memory upload captures data, not feeling. It logs events, conversations, tactical decisions. It doesn't capture the weight of a choice made in a dark cave. It doesn't capture why I buried those parts instead of using them. Her hand went to her temple as if she could physically touch the difference. The replica would have a record of my defiance. It would know I disobeyed an order. It would be programmed to see that as a critical malfunction. A bug to be corrected. Her voice dropped to a whisper. It wouldn't understand. It would just execute. She leaned back against the wall, the fight draining out of her momentarily, replaced by profound exhaustion. But you're correct about the risk. Even a hollow copy of my combat style, my patterns, my instincts would be predictable to me. And I to it. It would be like fighting my own shadow. The outcome would hinge on which of us had more to lose. She met his gaze, her own struck with the truth, and it would have nothing left to lose at all. She pushed off the wall, the moment of vulnerability sealed away once more under a layer of grim purpose. Regardless of which model they send, the principle remains. We cannot hesitate. It will be a weapon, wearing a familiar face or not, and we must be ready to break it. She turned back toward the path to the smith, her posture straightening into that of a soldier once more. Let's deliver this core. Then we find our canyon, and we prepare for the day my past comes to kill my future. Zero proceeds to enter the camp. Soon enough, he reaches the weaponsmith tent and enters it. He sets all the salvage he found together with the flight core on the counter. Here you are, old one. Do with them as you see fit and make me that gun. The weaponsmith, a grizzled, older model android with one optic lens permanently darkened from a past blow, stared at the hull on his counter. His functional eye widened, flicking from the shimmering, unstable flight core to the unmistakable, high-grade alloy pieces of the Goliath glass machine. His hands, stained with oil and grit, hovered over the materials as if afraid to touch them. This is YorHa grade, he muttered, his voice a low rasp of awe and fear. He looked up, his single eye jumping from the core to Zero's impassive helmet, then to 2E standing silently in the entrance. His expression shifted from shock to dawning, horrified understanding. You didn't just find this. You took it. 2E stepped forward, her presence filling the cramped space of the tent. She placed the remaining storage pouch, the one containing the neural processor, on the counter beside the core with a soft, definitive thud. The prudence is irrelevant, she stated, her voice cool and devoid of emotion. Your task is to fabricate the firearm as requested. These are your materials. The smith swallowed, his atoms apple bobbing. He looked at the neural processor pouch, then back up at 2E's uncovered, piercing eyes. He knew what that pouch likely contained. Every android did. This is beyond my usual work. If Command finds out. They will not, 2E interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. You will be discreet. You will use only what is necessary. You will ask no questions. And you will have it ready within the time frame we agree upon. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more threatening than any shout. Your cooperation ensures your continued operation. Your silence ensures your survival. Do you understand? The smith looked from her to Zero, then back to the incredible, dangerous bounty on his counter. The fear in his eye warred with the craftsman's hunger for such pristine, high-grade materials. Finally, he gave a shaky nod. I understand. It will be done. But the core stabilizing it, integrating it with the Goliath frame, it will take time. A day. Maybe more. 1 day, 2E confirmed, straightening up. We will return then. She didn't thank him. There was no gratitude in this transaction, only mutual necessity laced with unspoken threat. She turned to leave, but paused at the tent's flap, looking back one last time at the components on the table. The flight core pulsed with a stolen, dying light. The Goliath parts were jagged and brutal. The neural processor was a quiet, grim secret. It was all here. The bones of the rebellion laid out on a scarred workbench, paid for in treason and salvage. She met the smith. Zero turns to leave, but stops. Then side turns towards the old android. If it makes you feel better, we did not kill anyone. We just stole parts. Don't make it better, but also not the worst. He turns once more and proceeds to head out the tent. 2E didn't react until they were 3 alleys away from the smith's tent, the shadows of the scrap pile walls closing around them. Then she stopped, turning to face him, her expression tight. That was unnecessary, she said, her voice low but sharp. He is afraid. Fear makes him compliant. Giving him moral comfort only makes him question his fear and our control. She held his gaze for a beat, then let out a short, controlled breath. But it's done. She turned and began moving again, this time toward the camp's eastern exit, the one that led back into the open wastes and toward the Kenyan network. Her mind was already shifting gears, leaving the smith and his anxieties behind. They were a variable, now contained. The next variable was terrain. We have approximately 23 hours until the weapon is ready, she stated, her stride purposeful. We will use that time to locate and secure a defensible position within the canyon system. Pod will run continuous scans for subterranean stability, thermal signatures, and existing machine burrows. As they slipped through the makeshift gate, little more than a gap in a collapsed wall, and back into the harsh light of the desert, she glanced at him sidelong. When the executioner comes, whether it wears my face or another's, it will strike where we are most vulnerable. Our refuge cannot be vulnerable. She led the way up a rocky incline, her movements sure-footed on the loose stone. The canyon's mouth lay ahead, a dark gash in the ochre landscape. And you should know, she added, her voice dropping, if it is another E-model, it will have none of my hesitation. It will not question. It will not feel. It will simply complete its mission. She paused at the edge of the shadow cast by the towering cliff face. The only advantage we have is that I know how they think. Because I was. How they think. She looked back at him, the sun catching the determined set of her jaw. Let's go find a hole to hide in, before they come to put us in one. Zero sighs and begins to make way out the camp with 2E. 2E, while your logic is true. I calculated making the old one furious may not be of benefit, as it may be prompt to betrayal. I rather have his good grace and trust. I do not want to be seen as a tyrant. They already fear me as is. He says softly. Then he took a dash, jumps to a wall, and starts kicking himself up, climbing it to get altitude for Overwatch and scan the distance to the canyon and camp. Zero lands on the roof and walks to the edge to survey. 2E watched him scale the wall with a fluid, effortless grace that defied his heavy armor. His logic was sound, in its own way. Fear bred resentment, and resentment bred betrayal. It was a calculation she understood, even if her own instincts leaned toward the certainty of controlled terror. Noted, she called up, her voice carrying easily in the dry air. Your method has merit. We will monitor his compliance. It was a concession, small but deliberate. He was building something, not just destroying. She was relearning how to do the same. As he surveyed the distance from his perch, she didn't idle. She slipped into the shadow of the wall below, her own sensors sweeping the perimeter in a low, overlapping arc with his elevated vantage point. Efficiency through coordination. The southern approach to the canyon mouth is clear for 500 meters, she reported, her voice pitched to carry to him. No thermal signatures beyond baseline fauna. The rock formations will provide cover once we're inside. She paused, her eyes tracking alone. Distant glint that resolved into a scrap of metal spinning in the wind. Not a threat. Your overwatch is optimal. We move on your mark. The longer we remain in the open between here and the canyon, the greater our exposure. She waited, a statue of black and white in the lengthening shadow, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her virtuous contract. The smith was a handled variable. The weapon was a future asset. The canyon was the immediate objective, and the executioner, whether it wore her face or not, was a clock ticking down in the back of her mind. Every second spent debating was a second lost to preparation. Zero, once finished, took a step forward and let himself drop. Free falling, he flips in the air and kicks the wall, making his momentum push him away as he flips once more, then lands on the ground with the grace of a cat before 2E. Zero then stands back to his feet and turns. Let's move. With that he sprung into action, running towards the canyon's general direction. 2E matched his pace instantly, falling into a flanking position half a step behind and to his right. Her own movements were studying lethal economy, each stride covering maximum ground with minimal wasted energy, her skirt flowing around her thighs as she ran. As they neared the darker maw of the canyon entrance, a jagged split in the earth that seemed to swallow the desert light, she signaled with a sharp gesture. I'll take point for initial recon. Pod forward scan for structural integrity and biological signatures. Pod 042, acknowledged. Scanning. The support unit zipped ahead, its single light casting a thin beam of light into the gloom. She slowed to a prowl at the threshold, her uncovered eyes adjusting instantly to the lower light. You have the rear guard, she said to Zero, her voice dropping to a tactical murmur. Watch the approach. Anything follows us in, we don't want it at our backs. She didn't wait for confirmation, slipping into the canyon's shadow. The temperature dropped noticeably, the air growing damp and cool. The walls rose sharply on either side, striated rock worn smooth by millennia of wind and water. Pod's light swept over the narrow floor, revealing a dry riverbed littered with boulders and the skeletal remains of long-dead plant life. The main passage forks ahead, she reported, her voice echoing softly in the confined space. Left branch appears more stable, wider. Right is narrower, deeper. Pod, scan the left for any cavern systems or overhangs large enough for concealed encampment. She moved forward, her boots silent on the stone. Her senses were hyper-alert, parsing the scents of damp earth and ozone, the sounds of dripping water and distant, echoing cracks of settling rock. This place was ancient, a scar on the world. It felt appropriate. Pod 042, scanning. Left branch extends approximately 200 meters before terminating in a rockfall. Right branch shows promise. Detecting a consistent water source 30 meters in an underground stream. Chamber dimensions ahead are sufficient for our stated requirements. Water, 2E said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. She glanced back at Zero, a faint, determined glint in her eyes. That changes the equation. Follow me. She led the way into the right-hand fork, the passage narrowing until they had to move single file. Zero follows up. I noticed androids drinking water and consuming food. In that aspect, your kind is more closer than humans than mine. 2E paused for a step, the observation cutting through her tactical focus. She glanced back at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Correct, she said, her voice flat. YorHa units were designed with fully functional digestive and hydration systems. It was part of the verisimilitude to make us appear more human to any surviving humans, and to better infiltrate human environments should the need arise. A dry, humorless note entered her tone. It also made us dependent on supply lines. Another form of control. She continued forward, her hand brushing against the cool, damp rock. We can process organic and synthetic matter for fuel, but clean water is optimal for system efficiency. Finding a source here, she trailed off, her mind already calculating the implications. It means we can operate indefinitely without returning to camp for resupply. It means true independence. She stopped as the passage opened into a wider chamber. True to pods scanned, a shallow, clear stream trickled along one wall, emerging from a crack in the stone and disappearing into another. The chamber itself was large enough for them to stand comfortably, with a high, domed ceiling and several natural alcoves. Here, she stated, her voice echoing slightly in the space. This is defensible. One entrance. Water. Stable rock. She turned to face him, the stream's gentle murmur the only sound besides their breathing. We build here. Her blue-gray eyes held his for a moment. The fact that I need to drink that I can taste it was all part of the lie. But the water is real. The refuge we build will be real. That has to count for something. It was as close to a philosophical statement as she would allow herself. The rest was practicality. Pod, begin full geological survey. We need to identify the best locations for storage, concealment, and a fallback position. Zero walks to the water source and analyzes it. 2E. How close to emulate a human are you? My kind. The reploid kind. We are a race of sentient machines. We were made to be like humans. But we are not exactly like them. Our bodies are a biometallic blend. We can alter our bodies digitally to change certain aspects. Zero stands to look back to 2E, locking eyes with her. But you. If my scanners were not active, I could have confused you for a human female. 2E stood very still by the stream's edge, her reflection fractured in the rippling water. His words weren't just an observation, they were an incision, cutting straight through to the heart of what she was. Close enough to bleed, she said, her voice low and stripped of its usual clip precision. Close enough to feel pain, to require sleep cycles for cognitive repair, to process emotional stimuli as physical stress. She turned her head slightly, her profile sharp in the gloom. We have synthetic musculature that fatigues, a circulatory system that uses a colloidal fluid instead of blood, but which can leak, if damaged. She knelt, cupping her hand in the cool water, watching it run through her fingers. The design was comprehensive. We can digest organic matter for energy conversion. We can even, she trailed off, the next word sticking in her throat for a moment before she forced them out. We have reproductive system analogs. Non-functional, of course. Aesthetic. Meant to complete the illusion. She stood, flicking the water from her hand. But we don't age. We don't get sick. Our DNA is lines of code, not biology. We are weapons wrapped in a convincing skin, a puppet show for an audience that died millennia ago. Her gaze locked with his, stark and unflinching. Your scanners tell you I am a machine. Your eyes tell you I am a woman. Both are true, and both are lies told by the ones who built me. She gestured to the chamber around them. This building a refuge is the first thing I've done that isn't part of the show. It doesn't matter if I need water or not. What matters is that it's my choice to drink it here. She took a step toward him, her voice dropping. So yes, Zero. I am close enough to be confused for human. Close enough that it hurts, sometimes, to remember I'm not. But I am learning that the distance between what I am and what I was built to pretend to be the distance is where I finally get to exist. For the first time since he awakens, Zero is actually dumbfounded. His poker face breaks into confusion, realization, then admiration. Wait, you are saying that you have semi-functional genitals? Zero's hand goes to his face as he tries to digest that revelation. So many possible reasons for that runs through his processing unit. I don't know how to process that. Reploids did not have that function. Then again, a memory comes to his mind. Long ago, when I was active in my timeline, I met a reploid who married a human woman, and they managed to coexist. The reploid adjusted his body to live in a marriage life with the woman, and when they grew old, he modified his body to also appear like an old man, and they lived until she died of old age. Or so he told me. His eyes turns to 2E. Maybe a similar concept was thought for your designs. Let's just pretend humans still exist. Some may be able to form a sort of bond with an android, so having already the design would quickly fit in compatibility. He pauses a moment as his gaze turns to the stream. Although reproduction may not be an option, but other intimate acts may be accessible. 2E stared at him, her expression a mask of blank shock for a split second before it hardened into something defensive, almost offended. The clinical detachment she'd maintained shattered, replaced by a flush of heat across her synthetic skin that had nothing to do with system stress. That is, she started, her voice tighter than she intended. She cut herself off, turning her face away sharply to stare at the flowing water, as if it could wash away the sudden, startling intimacy of the topic. An invasive line of inquiry, she finished, her tone regaining some of its usual frost. She crossed her arms, a gesture that felt strangely protective. The designs were comprehensive, she repeated, the words coming out clipped. Every detail was meant to sell the illusion, to make us seamless infiltrators, perfect servants, believable companions. She shot him a sharp glance from the corner of her eye. Whether those functions were ever intended to be used is irrelevant. They are part of the blueprint, like the ability to appreciate the scent of a flower or the texture of fabric. Tools for a performance. She fell silent, watching the stream. The memory of a story the reploid who aged with his human wife hung between them, a poignant, impossible dream. Your comrade. He chose to modify himself, to become something for someone else. Her voice softened, almost imperceptibly. We were built with the modifications pre-installed. We never had a choice in the matter. It was never about compatibility. It was about completeness of the deception. She finally turned back to him, her gaze steady, but guarded. Do not mistake anatomy for intent, Zero. What I have it doesn't mean what you think it means. It's just another piece of the costume. She looked around the cavern, her jaw setting. Now, we have a refuge to secure. Pod, status on the structural scan? She was pulling the conversation back to solid, tactical ground with the force of a retreating army. The vulnerability of the moment, the sheer human awkwardness of it, was a threat she wasn't equipped to handle. Not here. Not now. Not when they were still so exposed. Once more, Zero is found without words. He stares at 2E dumbfounded. He tries not to crack a smile, keeping his composure. 2E was embarrassed. Zero closes his eyes and let the smirk grow. He turns around. Sorry, I did not mean to embarrass you. Maybe I overstepped. He begins to make way to a certain spot. Zero then looks over his shoulder back to 2E. Also, you are kind of cute. When embarrassed, his smirk widens. Then he proceeds to continue his way. 2E's entire body stiffened as if struck by a high-voltage shock. Her hands clenched at her sides, knuckles going white under her gloves. The flush that had been creeping up her neck now burned across her cheeks, vivid and unmistakable even in the cavern's low light. I am not, she started, her voice strangled, cutting off. She took a sharp, steadying breath that did nothing to calm the sudden, chaotic error messages cascading through her emotional dampeners. The word was a virus. It had no tactical value. It served no operational purpose. It was a frivolous, subjective, human judgment, and it was aimed at her. She watched his retreating back, the casual sway of his crimson armor as he moved away, that infuriating smirk practically audible in his posture. For a second, pure, unadulterated fury, hot and sharp, replaced the embarrassment. She wanted to throw a rock at his head. She wanted to wipe that smirk off his face with her fist. She wanted to. She forced herself to exhale slowly, her systems manually overriding the spike in her core temperature. This was a tactical diversion, an emotional ambush, and she had walked right into it. Your assessment is irrelevant and unprofessional, she finally managed, her voice icily controlled, though it couldn't quite mask the residual heat. And your smirk is noted. She turned her back on him, focusing with intense concentration on the stream as if its hydrological properties were the most fascinating thing in the world. Pod, she barked, her tone brittle. Report. Now. Pod 042. Structural scan complete. Chamber integrity 94%. Optimal locations for concealed storage identified in the northeast alcove. The water source is potable with minimal filtration required. No hostile, biological, or machine signatures detected within a 50-meter radius. Good, she said, the word clipped. She didn't look at Zero. Begin marking the storage points. I will secure the perimeter. She moved with rigid, precise steps toward the chamber entrance, every line of her body screaming, "Do not approach." The refuge had its first rule: no more personal observations. Especially not cute ones. The Foundation had just gotten significantly more complicated. Zero quietly observes her movements. A soft snort comes to him as he continues to examine the rock wall formation for any structural changes. His expression turns neutral as memories comes to him. Seal. The resistant soldiers. The old man. But then memories of an even longer past resurface. The face of a brunette female reploid in military armor. Iris. How long has it been since he remembered Iris? And how his ignorance led to her death? The first time he mourned someone that was important to him, but he didn't recognize it. The first time he decided to completely close his heart and focus on the tasks, the war, the missions. His fist clenches, digging dirt in them. The question still lingers in his mind. The question that he asked himself back then when he lost his path. What am I fighting for? It was since then he decided to fight for those he believed in. Fight for himself. And just survive in each war. Putting those thoughts aside, Zero continues to survey, looking where he can set traps and defensive measurements. The silence that followed Zero's remark was thicker than the cavern's damp air, heavy with 2E's flustered retreat and his own private, echoing memories. He watched her stalk toward the entrance, her posture a masterpiece of offended dignity, and couldn't help the soft snort that escaped him. Cute. It was an absurd, human word, and it fit her perfectly in that moment a lethal weapon, flustered by talk of anatomy. The irony was almost beautiful. But the smile that had touched his lips faded as quickly as it came, wiped away by the ghost of a name. Iris. The memory was a shard of ice in his core. Not just her face, but the crushing weight of his own failure, the failure to understand what she meant until it was too late. He'd locked that part of himself away after that, sealed it behind layers of mission parameters and cold logic. Emotions were a vulnerability. Sentiment about people killed. He'd worn that truth like armor for centuries. His fist clenched, synthetic tendons tightening, crushing the dry dirt in his grasp. The grainy texture was a sharp anchor to the present. What am I fighting for? The old, gnawing question resurfaced, not with its usual hollow ache, but with a new, sharp edge. He looked at 2E's rigid back, at the way she was systematically, furiously scanning the perimeter as if she could banish her own embarrassment with tactical diligence. He wasn't fighting for humanity's memory. That was a dead god's lie. He wasn't fighting for a council or a command. He was fighting for this. For the chance to build a hole in the ground with someone who was just as lost, just as used, and just as stubbornly alive as he was. Someone who blushed when you called her cute. The thought was so alien, so unspeakably soft, that it felt dangerous. He released the dirt, letting it sift through his fingers. Sentiment was a luxury. But maybe, in this dead world, it was also a reason. He turned his focus outward, his enhanced optics scanning the chamber walls, the ceiling, the narrow entrance. He began mapping fields of fire, choke points, dead angles. He noted where the rock was brittle, where a well-placed shot could cause a collapse. After careful planning, Zero begins to make way to the entrance. I'll be right back, he announces to 2E as he makes way out of their obtained safe zone towards the open dangerous outer world. 2E snapped her head around as he announced his departure, her earlier embarrassment momentarily eclipsed by sharp, tactical alarm. Zero, wait, the protest was out before she could cage it, her voice cutting through the cavern's stillness. She took half a step forward, then stopped, her training warring with the unfamiliar impulse to demand an explanation. He wasn't under her command. He was an ally. A devastatingly capable one. He didn't need to report his movements. But he was also walking out into a contested area alone after they just discussed the high probability of a YorHa executioner unit hunting for them. And after he'd said that, she forced her stance to relax, crossing her arms in a gesture that was equal parts frustration and containment. State your objective, and Ia, she said, her tone reverting to its usual clipped, professional cadence, though it couldn't quite mask the underlying tension. Uncoordinated movements increase risk. Her eyes track him to the mouth of the cavern, her mind running scenarios. Was it a scouting run he hadn't mentioned? A personal errand? A tactical assessment he preferred to do alone? The not knowing grated on her systems. Pod 042. Unit Zero's vital signs and trajectory indicate movement toward the eastern mineral deposits previously scanned. Hypothesis: procurement of raw materials for perimeter fortifications. 2E's lips pressed into a thin line. Of course. He was already acting on the defensive plans they just tacitly agreed upon. He was building, while she was standing here flustered. Understood, she said, mostly to herself. She moved to the entrance, not following him out, but positioning herself in the shadows where she could watch his crimson form diminish against the vast, barren landscape. Pod, maintain passive scan on his position. Alert me of any approaching hostiles or changes in his status. She leaned against the cool rock, her gaze fixed on the horizon where he disappeared. The ghost of his smirk seemed to hang in the air around her. Cute. She shoved the memory down, deep into the same compartment where she stored mission-critical anxieties. It was a vulnerability, a distraction. But as the minutes ticked by and the only sound was the whisper of the wind over stone, she found her vigilance laced with a new, unwelcome thread of concern. Not just for the mission, for him. Silently, she cursed the comprehensive, deceptive design of her own emotional subsystems and settled into wait. An hour passes. Then the shape of someone coming back is seen, moving silent among the hiding caveways. Scans detect the signature of Zero. As he comes to the dim light, he was hauling a huge makeshift bag, made of cloth, filled with lots of materials. And he was carrying the large pack with ease. Once he comes inside, he lets the pack down with a loud clank. The sheets spread showing scraps of metal, wood, cloth, rags among other things. Zero makes the movement to crack his knuckles as he starts browsing his haul for specific stuff he needs to start working. 2E watched him return from her post at the entrance, the tension in her shoulders easing a fraction as his signature resolved clearly on her scanners. She noted the size of the haul, the efficiency of his movements, the silent competence of it all. It was a language she understood far better than awkward personal remarks. By the time the heavy pack hit the ground with a metallic clatter, she had already crossed the chamber, her own analytical gaze sweeping over the spread materials. Efficient, she acknowledged, her voice all business once more. She knelt opposite him, her gloved fingers sifting through the scraps, assessing their potential. The metal sheeting can be fashioned into reinforced barriers for the entrance choke point. The wood is too brittle for structural support, but can be used for tripwires and alarm triggers. She picked up a length of frayed, high-tensile cable from the pile. This is YorHa issue bindings. From a downflight unit, likely. Her tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of the earlier emotional tremor. Its tensile strength is exceptional. We can use it for snares or to secure heavier obstacles. Pod 042. Analysis of chamber geometry complete. Recommending energy tripwire placement at coordinates 34.7 by 12.2 and 22.1 by 8.9. These positions will create overlapping fields of detection with minimal resource expenditure. Implement the schematics, Pod. 2E ordered, rising to her feet. 0. I will begin fabricating the barrier frames. You have more experience with improvised defenses. The trigger mechanisms and placement should be your priority. She moved to a clear section of the cavern floor, pulling a compact toolkit from a compartment on her thigh. Her movements were brisk, precise, her focus absolute. The memory of his smirk, the heat in her cheeks, they were filed away, locked behind a door marked irrelevant to current objective. The scrape of metal, the hum of Pod's fabricator, the planning of their mutual survival, these were her elements now. She began to bend a sheet of scrap metal with controlled, superhuman force, the sharp screech of protesting alloy filling the space, a sound far more comforting than any lingering silence. I also brought other things. Found materials to make a stone stove. Rusted frying pans, but they still work. Zero speaks as he continued to rummage on the pile of supplies and materials, also make us bedding in tents. And a few other things. I also explored many of the abandoned buildings. I found some spare clothing. They are not pristine, but are still usable. He states as he begins to pull out many types of clothes. Some were ragged, others in usable condition. I assumed that you might want to wear more comfortable clothing besides your battle dress, outside missions. He pulls out what looks like a piece of women's underwear. I think this is human female undergarments. I wasn't sure, but do you androids wear such underwear? He tosses it to the side with the rest of the clothes as he continues to explore. The question wasn't said with malice nor tease, just normal innocent curiosity. 2E's hands froze on the metal sheet she was bending, the screech of stressed alloy dying into a ringing silence. Her head turned slowly, her blue-gray eyes locking onto the scattered pile of clothing and the specific item Zero had just casually tossed aside. For a long moment, she simply stared. The practical part of her brain cataloged the items: textiles for insulation, potential camouflage, non-combat utility. The other part, the part still raw from his earlier comment, short-circuited briefly. She stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her thighs, leaving smudges of rock dust on the black fabric. Her expression was a carefully neutral mask, but a faint, incredulous tension lingered around her eyes. The stove and bedding are acceptable, she said, her voice carefully measured. Increased comfort can reduce systemic fatigue, which is tactically sound. She walked over to the pile, her movements deliberate. She nudged a relatively clean, dark gray tunic with the toe of her boot. Standard issue civilian wear. Durable. Non-reflective. It will serve. Then her gaze swept to the discarded undergarment. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The flush threatened to return, but she forced it down with the sheer act of will. YorHa units, she stated, her tone becoming clipped and clinical, are issued standardized undergarments as part of the combat uniform. They are designed for functionality and integration with the outer layer. She gestured vaguely at her own form-fitting leotard. What humans wore is irrelevant. We were built to appear human, not to replicate their wardrobe choices in detail. She crossed her arms, fixing him with a look that was both stern and faintly exasperated. And while I appreciate the logistical consideration, she said, the words sounding like they were being pulled from her, the procurement of that category of apparel is unnecessary and a distraction from priority objectives. She turned back to her workbench, picking up a metal bar with slightly more force than necessary. Focus on the defensive triggers, Zero. The perimeter is our primary concern. My attire is functionally optimal as it is. But as she returned to shaping the barrier frame, her eyes flicked once more to the small pile of clothes. A tunic, pants. Simple, worn things. Not a uniform. Not a costume. Just clothes. The concept was so alien it almost hurt. She shoved the thought away and channeled the confused energy into the metal, bending it with a definitive, sharp crack. Zero listens but does not reply. He pulls a worn-out black hoodie from the pile, looks at it. It had some crimson stripes on the sleeves. His face breaks into a soft smirk. Then he proceeds to put it on. Once on, he looks at himself. Looked a bit funny, him wearing the hoodie over his armored body. The size was larger than his own body, as he is around 160 centimeters tall. He looked like a kid wearing his dad's hoodie, but Zero did not mind. He liked it. Then Zero proceeds to pick the other materials as he proceeds to start building defensive precautions. 2E watched from the corner of her eye as Zero pulled the oversized hoodie over his crimson armor. The sight was so utterly, bizarrely incongruous that her meticulous work on the barrier frame stuttered for a second. The fierce, ancient warrior who had single-handedly dismantled a Goliath-class machine was now swimming in a faded black hoodie with red stripes, the sleeves dangling past his fingertips. He looked soft, approachable, yeah. A strange, tight feeling coiled in her chest, something between exasperation and an ache she couldn't name. It was not tactical. It was a liability. It would snag on machinery, impair his range of motion, and provide zero defensive value. And he liked it. She looked away, focusing with intense concentration on welding a joint. The sharp hiss and flare of the energy torch filled the silence. It is non-reflective, at least, she said finally, her voice deliberately flat as she examined her weld. And the bulk may disrupt thermal profiling slightly. It was the closest thing to approval she could muster, a tactical observation stripped of any personal acknowledgement. But she couldn't stop the next thought. Sharp and uninvited, he looks like someone who belongs in a world that isn't just ruins and war. It was a dangerous, sentimental thought. She quashed it, channeling the irritation into the next weld, the spark flying brighter. Just ensure it doesn't impede your draw speed, she added, her tone shifting back to pure professionalism. The defenses won't build themselves. She returned to her work, the rhythmic sounds of construction, the scrape of metal, the hum of pods, fabricator filling the cavern. But her awareness remained split. Part of her tracked his every movement as he began setting up the tripwire triggers, his hands deft despite the comically large sleeves. The other part was acutely, painfully aware of the small pile of civilian clothes lying forgotten near the wall, and of the man, a legend wrapped in a child's hoodie, calmly building a home in the dark. I am not planning on wearing this for missions. Zero replies as he knew well what she means. He continues to build the defense measurements. This is something I will wear here on downtime. It's cozy, and I like it, he simply said. 2E's welding torch paused mid-arc, the bright flare dying down to a dull glow. She didn't look up from the joint she was sealing, but her shoulders tightened slightly. Downtime. The word was foreign. A concept for beings who had moments between wars, not androids built for perpetual engagement. Understood, she said, her voice carefully neutral. She finished the weld with a final, precise touch, then deactivated the torch. The sudden quiet felt heavy. It is tactically sound to have non-combat attire for rest cycles. Reduces wear on primary systems. It was a sterile, logical justification. But as she set the torch aside and wiped her hands on her thighs again, her gaze drifted back to the small pile of clothes. Her own uniform, the sleek, imposing black dress, the blindfold, the thigh-highs was a statement. It was YorHa. It was death. It was a lie. A simple tunic pants, they were just fabric. They had no allegiance. She stood and walked over to the pile, her movements stiff, as if approaching an unknown piece of equipment. She picked up the gray tunic, holding it up. It was soft from countless washes, worn thin in places. It smelled faintly of dust and something herbal, a ghost of a life that had evaporated centuries ago. For a long moment, she just stared at it, her face an unreadable mask. Then, without a word, she folded it with a soldier's neat precision and placed it to the side, separate from the scrap metal and tools. A silent, almost grudging acceptance. She didn't look at Zero. Instead, she turned back to the half-built barrier, her voice returning to its usual clipped efficiency. Pod, recalculate the structural load-bearing points for the overhead baffles. Factor in the potential for falling debris from sustained concussion attacks. But her hand, as she picked up another sheet of metal, lingered for just a second on the cool, warm fabric of the tunic sleeve. A ghost of a touch. A question without an answer. Zero watches a moment. A ghost of a smile growing on him. Then he proceeded to work. The spare clothes may not have mission functionality, but your battle dress will start receiving wear and tear if you constantly use it. So using spare clothes on downtime will help battle dress last longer, and it already had its share of battles. Zero points out how her battle dress had some minor damage on it from battles. The inner leotard, which top was black and lower half was white, Joliet-style sleeves with leather gloves, and the skirt part that wraps her torso making it look like a complete dress with a slit on one side, had some signs of minor damage and some tear caused by battles. No repairs ever since meeting him and leaving YorHa. And if she has to use her emergency protocol of self-destruct, which uses the dress part of her battle outfit as catalyst to create an explosion that brings her to critical damage levels, she would be left with little protection for battle from then on. As she will be left in nothing but her leotard part after. 2E's hand stilled. Her gaze dropped, following the line of Zero's pointed observation. She had seen the scuffs, the torn threads of the hem of her skirt, the faint scoring along the bodice from near misses and grazes. She had catalogued them as superficial, within acceptable parameters. But seeing them through his eyes through the lens of prolonged survival without resupply, without the bunker's maintenance bays, made them look different. Not just wear and tear. The slow, inevitable unraveling of the only identity she'd ever known. Her fingers brushed over a particularly deep score along her hip, a souvenir from the berserker swarm in the desert. The material was resilient, but it was not invincible. And he was right about the self-destruct protocol. It was a last resort that would leave her in nothing but the vulnerable, skin-tight leotard functional, but offering no protection, no dignity. A quiet, cold realization settled in her core. Her uniform wasn't just armor, it was her skin. Shedding it, even for downtime, felt like a surrender, like admitting she was something other than a YorHa soldier. She looked from the damage on her dress to the folded gray tunic sitting apart on the stone. Then her eyes lifted to meet Zero's. The ghost of his smile was gone, replaced by that steady, assessing look. He wasn't offering pity. He was stating a fact. A tactical fact. You are not wrong, she conceded, her voice quieter than before. She straightened up, her posture defensive for a different reason now. The uniform is designed for durability, but it is not infinite. And without access to YorHa logistics, she trailed off, the unsaid words hanging between them. We are on our own. She walked back to the pile and picked up the pair of dark, stirred-looking pants that had been bundled with the tunic. They were simple, utilitarian. Nothing like the elegant, sweeping lines of her skirt. She held them up, assessing them as she were a new piece of gear. These will suffice, she stated, her voice firming back into its command tone, though it lacked its usual edge. It was a statement of acceptance, not enthusiasm. They offer greater mobility for manual labor and do not present unnecessary vulnerabilities. She placed the pants neatly atop the tunic. A set. Civilian clothes. For downtime. The concepts were so alien they buzzed in her processors like static. Thank you, she said, the words abrupt and stiff, directed more at the clothes than at him. Then she turned back to the barrier frame, her movements precise once more. Continue with the perimeter triggers. I will reinforce this section before we lose the light from the entrance. But as she returned to work, the reality of it settled onto her like a physical weight. The uniform was damaged. She was building a home in a cave. Zero's eye optics continues to watch 2E intensively for a moment longer. He has to admit that she looked nice with the dress. And he wonders who came up with the concept of wearing a gothic Lolita-style dress for combat. Then again, as he processed, he realized something. It's not just style. It's not just the fashion. He observed YorHa. Their entire army looked like undertakers coming to battle. So perhaps that's the theme. Mourn and death. Which it would make sense. Zero's eyes locked with 2Es for a moment, the physical aspects of a young woman in her early 20s. Albino-like aesthetics. Silver-white hair. Clear grayish-blue eyes. The fine makeup that just enhances her beauty. And the beauty mark of the mole on her chin, just below the lip corner. Pale skin contrasting to the black gothic Lolita dress. Whoever had the idea of the design was either an otaku or a genius. Probably a gooner. Zero did not realize he was staring for the first few minutes as he analyzes and admires 2E's physical form, now that he finally got a good look. He suddenly snapped, coming to, realizing. Oh. Sorry, he simply apologized as he turns and continues to work, finishing the last defensive precautions and then proceed to start making their makeshift tents. 2E felt the weight of his stare like a physical touch. It wasn't the usual tactical assessment scanning for weaknesses, gauging threat levels. This was different. Deeper. It was an analysis, yes, but one that lingered on the curve of her jaw, the fall of her hair, the deliberate artifice of her design. Her systems registered the extended optical contact, the pause in his work. A flicker of something not quite alarm, but a heightened awareness threaded through her circuits. She didn't move, her own gaze meeting his with a guarded stillness. She was used to being observed as a weapon, as a unit. This was observation of a different kind, and it made the synthetic skin on the back of her neck prickle with a sensation she couldn't name. When he spoke, his apology was so blunt and sudden it broke the tension like a snapped wire. She blinked, the intensity in her eyes softening into a flicker of something else, confusion, perhaps, or a dawning understanding of what he'd been seeing. You have nothing to apologize for, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. She turned her attention back to the metal in her hands, but her movements were slower, more deliberate. The design serves its purpose. It was a hollow defense, and she knew it. Mourn and death. The words hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Her uniform was a funeral shroud for a species that died millennia ago. She was a walking eulogy. She watched him turn back to his work on the tents, his focus a tangible shift in the atmosphere. The moment passed, but the echo of it remained, settling somewhere in her chest like a strange, new piece of data. She was seen, not just as 2B or 2E, but as the shape under the shroud. Silently, she picked up another tool and joined him at the tent frames, her movements precise but less rigid than before. The silence between them was no longer just the quiet of work, but something more charged, more conscious. She didn't look at him again, but her awareness of his presence, his proximity, was a constant, low hum in her processors, a variable she couldn't quantify, and didn't entirely want to. For the next hour, Zero, with 2Es 8 at times, manages to put up their makeshift tents. Using soft materials to make their bedding. Once he is done with that, he picks up another set of materials and walks to the stream. He begins to work on something, raising another small curtain-like tent with some other things. The small area was just at the shoreline of the stream. Zero stands up and turns to 2E. I am not sure, but I assumed you would have liked to clean yourself at certain times, so his eyes turns to the curtains. I made you a makeshift shower area. The curtains will give you privacy, and the bucket I put inside will help you pick water and use it to cleanse yourself. His eyes once more turns back to stare at 2E. 2E stopped what she was doing, her hand still holding a bundle of scavenged fabric she'd been about to fold. Her gaze followed his gesture to the small, curtained-off area by the stream. A makeshift shower. Privacy. Her systems processed the offer with a kind of stunned silence. It wasn't the utility of it that was undeniable, given the grime of the caves and the lingering machine oil spray from Babel's. It was the anticipation. He hadn't just brought back materials. He'd seen a need she hadn't even voiced and addressed it. She stood there for a long moment, the fabric forgotten in her hands. Her eyes traced the simple lines of the curtain, the bucket placed neatly inside. It was such a fundamentally human consideration. A small sanctuary. Thank you, she said, the words coming out softer, more genuine than her earlier stiff gratitude about the clothes. She looked from the shower area back to him, and for a second the professional mask slipped entirely, revealing a flicker of something bare and uncertain. It is a thoughtful allocation of resources. Maintaining system integrity is important. She carefully set the fabric down and walked toward the stream, stopping a few paces from the curtain. She reached out and touched the coarse material, testing its opacity. It was enough. I will utilize it later, she stated, her voice regaining some of its usual composure, though it lacked its earlier edge. After the perimeter is fully secured. She turned back to face him, her arms crossing over her chest, not in defiance, but in a gesture that seemed almost self-conscious. The gray tunic and pants lay folded nearby, a silent promise of a transformation she wasn't yet ready to make. But the shower was the first step. A way to wash away not just the dirt, but the weight of the day they cave, the burial, the intimacy, the stare. It is a good design, she added, almost as an afterthought, her eyes meeting his briefly before glancing away toward their half-finished barriers. Efficient. The compliment was awkward, delivered like a field report, but it was there. Zero gave a sharp nod, his expression neutral and stoic as usual. He turns around and returns to the main camp, starting to build the stone stove and a campfire for them. More hours passes and they finally manage to finish setting the refuge. It did not look much, but it was a refuge. It gave the necessities. Zero stares at it and nods, feeling pride of their work. 2E stood beside him, her arms crossed as she surveyed their work. The cavern was transformed, not into anything approaching comfort by pre-war standards, but into a space that was theirs. The barriers were crude but solid, the tripwires invisible and lethal in their intended paths. The tents, side by side, offered a semblance of privacy and shelter from the cave's damp chill. The stone stove sat cold and ready, a promise of warmth and cooked rations instead of nutrient paste. It was functional. It was defensible. It was, against all odds, a home. The feeling that rose in her core was foreign. It wasn't the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. That was a cold, transactional thing. This was warmer, softer. It felt like pride, but a shared pride tempered by the sheer improbability of it all. It is adequate, she said finally, her voice quiet in the cavern's stillness. The word felt insufficient. She glanced at Zero, his stoic profile outlined by the fading light from the entrance. More than adequate. It will serve. She walked a slow circuit around the perimeter, her fingers brushing over the taut lines of the tripwires, testing the stability of a barrier joint. Every detail had been considered, every vulnerability mitigated as much as possible. It was a soldier's refuge, built by soldiers. But it was also something more. Her gaze lingered on the curtained-off area by the stream. The simple bucket. The promise of cleanliness of a moment alone. It felt like a luxury so profound it was almost intimidating. She returned to the center of the space, standing near the cold fire pit. We should establish watch rotations, she said, her command voice returning, though it lacked its former edge. 2-hour intervals. I will take the first. But she made no move to assume her post. Instead, she stood there, taking in the dim, quiet space they had carved out of the rock. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was an absence of threat, of immediate pursuit. It was a space to breathe. You are right, she said, not looking at him, her eyes fixed on the shadows dancing on the far wall. About the clothes. About all of it. She gestured vaguely at the camp. This is tactically sound. But it is also, she searched for the word, one that wasn't in her standard lexicon. Necessary. For more than just survival. She finally turned her head toward him, her expression unguarded for a fleeting moment. Zero gave a slow nod. His helmet hisses as it disengages. He uses his hands to take it off, revealing his golden blonde long hair. Is not much, but it's our home until further notice. He walks to his tent, setting the helmet down. He takes off the hoodie, and then takes off his top vest, just standing in his black bodysuit and armored briefs, gauntlets, and boots. Zero sighs and closes his eyes. A second later his body begins to glow, then his armored forearms, boots, and torso breaks into digital illuminated particles and begins to reform. Recalibrating. Once it's done, Zero stands there, not in an armor, but a normal-looking body. His joints were still there, visible, but now they were mark lines instead of segments. His bodysuit was still worn, but now his forearms looked normal, his legs looked normal. A simple glance he would look like any non-YorHa android. Zero raises hands and ties his hair into a low ponytail, then proceeds to on his hoodie, then makes way to start the campfire. 2E watched the transformation in silence, her uncovered eyes taking in every detail. The dissolution of his armor into shimmering light, the reformation into something smoother, less overtly mechanized. It was a capability far beyond YorHa engineering, a seamless shift between combat-ready and civilian. The word felt strange even in her thoughts. He stood there, his long hair tied back, wearing the oversized hoodie over what now looked like a simple, dark bodysuit. He could have passed for a taller, more rugged resistance android. The demigod of destruction was gone, replaced by a man tending a campfire. Her analytical mind immediately catalogued the tactical implications. Reduced armor plating meant increased vulnerability, but also greater energy conservation and perhaps stealth. The lack of obvious weapon mount suggested his primary armaments were internally stored or could be summoned similarly. It was a fascinating, efficient design. But another part of her, the part still raw from his earlier observations, saw something else. He looked tired, not physically, but in the way he moved with a weary, practiced ease that spoke of centuries of weariness. The simple act of tying back his hair was profoundly human. Is that a default state or a specialized function? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. She stayed where she was, near the entrance, her own uniform still fully intact, a stark contrast to his softened appearance. The energy conservation must be significant. She watched him kneel to start the fire, the mundane task so at odds with everything she knew of him. It is prudent, she conceded. Maintaining a high alert configuration indefinitely is draining, even for us. She didn't move to help with the fire. Instead, she remained a sentinel, her gaze shifting from him to the dark mouth of the cavern, then back. The hoodie, the fire, the simple tent, it was all a performance of domesticity in the heart of a war zone. It was a lie, but it was a lie they were choosing to tell together. After a moment, she added quietly, "You should rest first. I will take watch." It wasn't an order. It was an offer. A recognition that he had just expended energy to reshape himself, and that the weight of building this refuge, this home, was a different kind of fatigue. One she was only beginning to understand. Reploids. Have different body configurations. Zero speaks as he begins to explain while he gets the fire going. The armored body setting is for combat, but we also have a non-armored setting for downtime. It's weaker than the armored setting, but not as weak as you think. Titanium ceramic composite is not as strong as Titanium X. Zero slowly stands up. Male reploids don't change much, they mostly are on their armor. Female reploids, on the other hand, do. Just like human women, they like fashion states. Zero continues. Then he taps his head. We store all our modes, weapons, and gear in a cyberspace pocket as data in our central processing units and memory banks. Our biental bodies using nanomachines reshapes our bodies to the configuration. 2E listened, her analytical mind fully engaged as she processed the information. The concept of a cyberspace pocket for gear storage was fascinating, far more efficient than YorHa's modular physical storage. The use of nanomachines for bodily reconfiguration explained the seamless transformation she'd witnessed. An elegant solution, she remarked, her tone thoughtful. YorHa relies on physical chassis swaps and external equipment loadouts. Your method allows for rapid adaptation without supply lines. Her gaze lingered on his more human-like form. The fashion consideration for female models is an interesting design priority. YorHa female units have standardized uniforms. Individual expression is not a parameter. She took a step closer, though maintaining a respectful distance, her eyes tracing the lines of his reconfigured body with the technician's curiosity. Your creators prioritized versatility and integration with civilian environments. Ours prioritized uniformity and combat efficiency above all else. There was no judgment in her voice, just factual observation. Yet, beneath it simmered a quiet realization. His design allowed for life. outside of war. Hers did not. The fire began to catch, casting flickering orange light across the cavern walls and glinting in her uncovered eyes. This non-armored state, does it affect your combat readiness? The recalibration time required to shift back. She wasn't just asking about tactical vulnerabilities. She was asking about him. About the cost of letting his guard down, even here in this refuge they'd built. The question hung in the air between them, underscored by the crackle of the newborn flames. In this setting I am slower, less protected. Zero replies as he looks at himself. My combat setting has more nodes and modules that help me in combat. But if you're worried if I can still fight like this? Yes. The sword does not make the warrior, like humans say. He pauses a moment. However, my defenses are no different than my other form settings of combat, especially one of them that enhances my attack power while leaving me vulnerable in defense, and another form which is the inverse. 2E nodded slowly, absorbing the data. Understood. A balance between efficiency and protection. The enhanced attack configuration would be optimal for ambush or overwhelming force scenarios, while the defensive form suits protracted engagements. Her tone was pure tactical analysis, but her eyes remained fixed on him in the firelight, studying the simpler lines of his non-armored form. The fact that you can assume the state here, she continued, her voice dropping slightly, indicates a level of trust in our perimeter, and in my ability to maintain watch. It was an observation, not a question. She looked from him to the fire, then back to the dark entrance of the cavern. The warm glow painted his features in soft orange and deep shadow, making him look more like a man and less like a legend. The hoodie, the tied-back hair, the relaxed posture, it was a vulnerability he was choosing to show, to her. The sword does not make the warrior, she repeated quietly, the human proverb feeling strange on her lips. A logical sentiment, but the warrior still needs the sword to fight the war. She finally moved, walking to the edge of the firelight and turning her back to the warmth, facing the darkness of the cave entrance. Her silhouette was sharp against the glow, all black lines in poised readiness. I will begin the first watch. You should utilize this configuration to its full advantage and rest. Conserve energy. But she didn't immediately begin her patrol. She stood there for a long moment, her profile outlined by the fire, watching the shadows dance on the rock walls. The domestic scene behind her, the fire, the makeshift tents, the man in the oversized hoodie felt like a fragile dream against the vast, consuming darkness of the world outside. And she was the only thing standing between them. Zero stood there, his hands in the hoodie pockets. In this form he looked like any young man that is about to become a young adult. Simple, domestic, but still lethal inside. It is sad that you, android, did not met any peace periods. Your behavior shows that you are not familiar with my actions. Zero looks downward in thought, then he turns to make way to the tent. I fought wars for centuries, but I should count myself lucky that also tasted peace periods in between. That is nothing but a luxury to you, but I promise that once this war is over, I will show it to you. Zero looks over his shoulder to 2E, nods, then gets inside his tent. 2E stood frozen as his words settled into the quiet of the cavern, heavier than the stone around them. I will show it to you. The promise hung in the air, a strange, delicate thing amid the smell of damp rock and fire smoke. It was a luxury, a fantasy, a tactical abstraction with no data to support it. Peace was the absence of mission parameters. It was silence without an objective. The very concept felt like a system error in her programming. Yet, as the sound of him settling into his tent faded, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the distant drip of water, the word peace echoed in a hollow chamber of her mind she hadn't known existed. Her gaze remained fixed on the dark maw of the entrance, but her focus was internal. She ran a quick, silent diagnostic. Systems nominal, emotional dampeners functioning at 87% capacity. The discrepancy was the ghost of his promise, a phantom data point that wouldn't resolve. Illogical, she thought, her jaw tightening. Sentimental, a distraction. She was a YorHa unit, an executioner model. Her purpose was to end things, not to show things, to experience things. But he had tasted peace. He had known times between wars. He carried that memory in his very design, in his ability to shed his armor and look like a man by a fire. She was built with only one state, ready. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor passed through her hands where they rested at her sides. She curled them into fists, the leather of her gloves creaking softly. She turned her head slightly. just enough to see the glow of the firelight illuminating the closed flap of his tent from the corner of her eye. He was in there, resting in his vulnerable state, trusting her to stand between him and the dark. Her gaze snapped back to the entrance, sharper now. Her posture straightened, every sense dialed to its utmost sensitivity. Pod, initiate passive perimeter scan. Alert me of any energy signature, no matter how faint. Pod 042, acknowledged. Scanning. The silence stretched, filled only by the fire's whisper and the hum of her own systems. She was a statue of black and white against the shifting shadows, a blade unsheathed in the gloom. Later on, a few hours later, Zero was sleeping. More like standby as he conserves energy and repairs any malfunctions. And then it begins. His mind begins to wander as the shadow of an old man stands before him. Get up. Zero opens his eyes in his dreams as he glares at the old man. You again. It's been a while. The shadow of the old man continues to speak. My masterpiece. After him. He's my nemesis. Our rivalry is what gives me motivation to live. Now go. Destroy them. Zero's vision blurs as flashes of robot carnage, synthetic blood. Machine broken apart. His hand filled with synthetic blood, the face of Iris when he faced her. When she finally shut down to never wake up again. His companions dying. X. And Seal. Seal. Zero sits up, hand extended as he softly cries out. His eye optics blink, scanning around to make sure he was not still dreaming. Then he looks at his hand. That dream again. It's been centuries since I last chatted. Zero scoots at the bedding, grabbing his hoodie and putting it on, stepping out the tent. Hands in the pocket as he walks to the fire. He tossed some dry wood on the fire to blaze it up once more and stares at it. The soft cry cut through the ambient silence of the cave like a snapped wire. 2E, who had been standing motionless at her post by the entrance, her back to the camp, went rigid. Her head turned, not with a jerk, but with the slow, predatory precision of a sensor locking onto a disturbance. She saw him sit up, hand outstretched into the darkness of his tent, the name seal, hanging in the air like a ghost. She watched him emerge, the oversized hoodie making him look strangely young and vulnerable as he shuffled to the fire, fed it, and stared into the flames. She didn't speak immediately. Her tactical mind dissected the scene, elevated biometrics inferred from his abrupt awakening, vocal distress, focused but tense posture. A nightmare, or a memory loop. Trauma reasserting itself during a defragmentation cycle. Quietly, she disengaged from her watch position and moved toward the fire. Her footsteps were silent on the stone. She stopped a few feet away, not crowding him, but close enough that the firelight caught the planes of her face. You were vocalizing, she stated, her voice low and devoid of judgment. It was a simple report. Your stress indicators are elevated. She paused, her blue-gray eyes reflecting the dancing flames. A memory recurrence? She didn't ask who is Seal. She didn't probe. She offered the observation, an open door if he chose to walk through it. Her own nights were often silent, filled not with dreams, but with cold data reviews of past executions. She envied and feared the vividness of whatever phantom had just gripped him. She remained standing for a moment longer, then, in a move that felt less like a tactical decision and more like an instinct, she slowly sank down to sit on a flat rock opposite him, across the fire. She kept her posture straight, her hands resting on her knees, but her gaze was on him, not the entrance. The watch could wait for a minute. Pod would alert them. The war you carry inside you, she said softly, almost to herself, watching the shadows play across his features. It leaves deeper scars than the one outside. I have shades of them. Faces I was ordered to forget. She didn't elaborate. She simply sat with them in the quiet crackle of the fire, a silent acknowledgement that they were both haunted in their own ways. Zero remains quiet for a few minutes. He listens to 2E, but doesn't reply yet. His expression neutral. But then after those few minutes passed, he speaks. For a long while, when my memory was fragmented and I did not know about my past because of a certain reason, I began having certain dreams. Dreams about my creator. Zero pauses, gathering his words. I was created to be a destroyer, to infect machines with a virus and put them under my control. But because of an incident, I lost my memory and the virus transferred to one who became our archenemy for centuries. Zero looks at his hands. I killed, destroyed. Many memories are still fragmented, but I remember the majority, and those dreams haunt me even today. It's because of me. Humanity went almost extinct with wars. Back in my era, is because of me. Many wars were brought upon. Is because of me, 90% of humanity perished. X. Transferred my consciousness into a copy body, this body, and my real body was set on stasis for study. However, a vile man took over the body, put a false personality on it, and brought destruction upon humanity. Centuries later, in my awakened before this one, I fought that man. I fought that body and destroyed it. This body is not my true body, and because it is not, my power is less than what I originally had. 2E listened, her face an impassive mask in the flickering firelight, but her eyes, uncovered and alert, held a depth of understanding that went beyond mere tactical analysis. He spoke of creators and purpose, of being a weapon turned loose upon the world. The parallels were not lost on her. She was built to erase, to kill, and then to forget. He was built to corrupt, to conquer, and then to remember. When he fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging in the air thicker than the smoke, she didn't offer empty comfort. She didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. Such words were meaningless to soldiers who carried the blood of heirs on their hands. Instead, she spoke quietly, her gaze fixed on the flames between them. We are our Creator's sins, given form and function. Her voice was flat, factual. They built their ambitions into our cores and called it purpose. My purpose was to murder my own kind and wipe their memories clean. To be the hand that enforces a lie. She shifted slightly, the leather of her gloves creaking as she flexed her fingers. You speak of a copy body, of diminished power. Her eyes lifted to meet his. I am an executioner model operating outside my command network. My systems are already degrading without scheduled maintenance. My authority codes are revoked. I am a ghost in a dying machine. A faint, grim smile touched her lips, a fleeting, brittle thing. We are both echoes of our original designs. Flawed, weakened, haunted. She paused, letting the crackle of the fire fill the space. But we are here, and we are choosing what to do with the broken pieces they left us. She stood up, not to retreat, but to step closer to the fire, her silhouette casting a long shadow toward the cavern's depths. You asked me earlier what separates machines from androids. Perhaps the answer is this: the capacity to be haunted, to feel the weight of the blood, even when the orders have faded. She looked back at him, her expression struck in the orange glow. Your original body may be gone, your power may be less, but the war you carried is the same war, and now it is mine as well. She didn't reach out. She didn't offer a touch, but she held his gaze, an unwavering, solid presence in the shifting dark. The fire is low. I will gather more wood. It was a dismissal of the heavy silence, a return to practicalities. But the space between them had shifted. They were no longer just two soldiers sharing a campfire. They were two ghosts, recognizing the same chains on their wrists. Zero watches 2E move. Then his blue eyes land on his hands once more. Reploids and androids. They are not so much different. He mumbles off to himself. Then again, I am not a reploid per se, or originally wasn't. I was more of an android myself. One that has infinite potential, one that can self-evolve. The new generation of a robot master. 2E paused at the edge of the firelight, a few dry branches gathered in her arms. His murmured words, not a reploid per se, infinite potential robot master, drifted across the space between them, heavy with implications she couldn't fully grasp, but intuitively understood. She turned back, the fire casting her profile in sharp relief against the dark rock. Her gaze was steady, analytical, but softer now in the dim, dancing light. A prototype, she stated, not as a question but as a conclusion. A first of your kind, not mass-produced, not given a model number. Her eyes traced the lines of his form, the human-like set of his shoulders under the hoodie, built with a potential that terrified your creators. She walked back to the fire, dropping the wood beside the pit with a soft clatter. Kneeling, she carefully arranged a few pieces on the embers, coaxing the flames back to life. The action was methodical, giving her time to choose her words. YorHa or mass-produce. Tools from a factory. Interchangeable. Expendable. She looked up at him, the new flames reflecting in her eyes. But you were unique. A singularity. And they feared what you could become. She settled back on her heels, dusting her hands on her thighs. That ferret is something I know. My own design was a secret. A weapon hidden among the regulars. Fear of discovery, it shapes you. The fire grew, wrapping them in a bubble of warmth and light against the cavern's chill. You carry the weight of your origin, just as I carry mine. Perhaps that is the true difference between us and the machines we fight. She met his gaze across the flames, her voice low but clear. They were built for a purpose and fulfill it blindly. We were built for a purpose and then chose to defy it. Zero clenches his fist. Perhaps you are right. I was treated to rival X to destroy X and his legacy. X is the true robot with infinite potential. I was just a pale imitation made to match him. However, I chose to go against my protocols and joined him instead. His gaze raises to meet 2E's. And now, there is you. 2E's breath caught, just for a second, at his words. And now there is you. They hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. The fire crackled, painting his face in wavering light, and shadowed the ancient warrior, the prototype who chose defiance, now looking at her across the flames. She held his gaze, her blue-gray eyes wide and unblinking. The comparison was implicit, unspoken, but thunderous in her mind. X was the ideal. The perfect one others were meant to destroy or emulate. And YorHa was built in the image of a humanity that never existed. We are all pale imitations of a ghost. X, she repeated quietly, the name a foreign syllable. Your ideal. Your opposite. Your reason to exist, rewritten by your own choice. Her voice was low, almost wondering. She understood that the crushing weight of a purpose imposed from the outside and the seismic act of wrenching free from it. Her own hands, resting on her knees, curled slightly, mimicking his clenched fist unconsciously. YorHa had no X, she said, her tone turning hollow. We had a lie. A dead moon and empty proclamations. Our ideal was a phantom. Our purpose was to die for a memory. She looked down into the fire, watching a piece of wood splinter and collapse into embers. To rebel against a ghost it is a quieter kind of defiance. But it is still defiance. She lifted her eyes back to his. You chose to join your rival. To fight for his legacy instead of against it. A faint, grim understanding dawned on her features. I have chosen to stop fighting for the ghost. To fight against the ones who perpetuated the lie. She paused, the next words leaving her lips with a soft, final certainty. So now there is you. And there is me. Two echoes. Choosing our own war. She didn't smile. She didn't reach out. But she rose to her feet in one smooth motion and walked around the fire, not stopping until she stood beside where he sat. She didn't look at him. Instead, she stared out into the darkness beyond their camp, her profile sharp against the glow. The fire is sufficient for the night, she stated, her voice regaining some of its command cadence, though it remained quiet. I will resume watch. But she didn't move away immediately. She stood there, a silent, solid presence at his side, a fellow echo, a comrade in a war they were only just beginning to define. Zero thinks on 2E's words. For a moment he remained silent. But then, 2E, for a long time, I felt to be without a purpose. All I did was to fight, he speaks softly, looking at the dancing flames. And when I awakened to this era, once more I found myself like it. At first, his eyes turns to look at 2E. But you gave me a purpose. You gave me a reason to fight. A reason to protect once again. And that is you. I will fight to end this war, so that you finally are free to live for yourself, and finally be a normal girl. 2E went utterly still. Not the poised stillness of a hunter, but the frozen stillness of a system overload. His words didn't just land, they detonated in the silent spaces of her core, echoing in the hollow chambers where her programming used to reside. A purpose, a reason to fight, to protect, not humanity, not a command. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto his. The firelight danced in them, but behind the reflection was a profound, tremoring shock. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The concept was so alien, so immense, it short-circuited her ability to process it. Either word was a dry crackle, barely audible over the fire. She swallowed, the movement visible in the pale column of her throat. I am not, she tried again, her voice gaining a thread of strength, edged with something like panic. I am not something to be fought for. I am a weapon, a soldier, a normal girl. The phrase sung between them, absurd and heartbreaking. She was a gothic-led executioner android built on the bones of a dead species. There was nothing normal about her existence. But that was his point, wasn't it? To fight for a future where she could be something else. Something undefined. Something hers. The trembling started in her hands, a fine vibration she couldn't suppress. She clenched them into fists at her sides, her knuckles white against the black of her gloves. The denial she was trying to form died in her throat. To reject his purpose was to reject the fragile hope he was offering for both of them. She looked away from him, her gaze fixing on the darkness beyond the firelight as if searching for an enemy to focus on. But there was only the vast, empty dark, and his words filling the space between them with terrifying beautiful weight. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and stripped bare. I do not know how to be that. A normal girl. She said the words as if tasting them, finding them bitter and strange. But she took a slow, deliberate breath, a human gesture she'd copied but never felt until this moment. If you fight to end this war, then I will fight beside you, not as your purpose, but as your ally. She turned her head back toward him, her expression a battlefield of awe and fear. Zero's eye optics still locked on two E's. His expression neutral. I am far from being normal myself. All I know is war and destruction, but still, I still try, from time to time, if I can. I am sure that so can you. Tui stared at him, her breath catching in her synthetic lungs. The fire seemed to dim for a moment, the world narrowing to his face, his words, the impossible promise in his eyes. I still try. It was the simplest, most devastating logic she had ever heard. A choked sound escaped her, not a laugh, not a sob, but something raw and fractured. She looked down at her own hands, the hands that had killed so many of her own kind, that had followed orders etched in blood and lies. Don't, she whispered, the word cracking. Don't say such things. It was a plea, not a command. Her head shook slowly, her silvery hair brushing her cheeks. You can't build a future on someone as broken as me. But even as she said it, she knew it was a feeble defense. He was broken. He was a destroyer who chose to protect, a weapon who dreamed of peace. His very existence was a paradox, and he was offering that paradox to her. She looked back up at him, her eyes glistening in the firelight with unspent emotion. I don't know how to try, she confessed, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames. Trying implies the possibility of failure, of hope. YorHa units are not programmed for hope. We are programmed for completion, for termination. She took a step closer, drawn to the warmth he seemed to radiate. But her gaze searched his face, looking for the flaw in his resolve, the crack in his certainty. She found none. You are the most illogical, reckless, impossible thing I have ever encountered, and you make me want to believe in trying. Her hand rose almost against her will, hovering in the space between them. She didn't reach out to touch him. She just let it hang there, a silent testament to the chasm she was terrified to cross. I will fight beside you, she repeated, her voice gaining strength. I will try to see what lies beyond the war, but you must promise me something. Her eyes locked onto his, blazing with a fierce, desperate light. Promise me you will not make your purpose me. Your purpose must be the peace itself. Because if you fall, she didn't finish the sentence. The image of his light going out, of being left alone in the silence with his ghost as her only reason to go on, was too terrible to give voice to. She let her hand fall back to her side, her posture straightening as if bracing for a blow. Do you understand? Zero stares at 2E, then at her hand. This was not his area of expertise. He was never the encouraging type. That was X's area. For centuries, I fought just for the sake to bring peace. Peace that was easily broken time and time again. His eyes moved back to 2E. I destroyed even those I cared about. But there was one time I protected for the sake of someone, and I even gave my life to. Zero's hand quickly moves to catch 2E's and is in a firm hold. It was not a tender hold, not an affectionate one, but still showing support. There is no one else I know in this era but you. The resistance androids, yes I do had taken a liking to them, but all this, I had done it because of you. I am awakened because of you. I am fighting because of you. If it weren't for your remorse to this lie, I would not have cared and just continued to fight for the sake of survival. He pauses. I am destroying your kin's hope to have a purpose, to end this madness, once and for all. People hope for this war to end, for humans to return. YorHa knows is a lie and want to continue the war just to have a purpose. I made you go irregular to end this war. Give your back to those that made you what you are to end this madness. A madness that may bring more madness. Telling the truth will make androids lose their purpose and go mad, but continuing this war also may bring more unnecessary death. And I stand in the middle, the last reploid, like the judge coming to send a verdict. And all I want is for you to finally be free of the torment, of the guilt, the remorse, and then make a life for yourself. Tui's hand went rigid in his grip, not pulling away, but frozen, as if his touch had sent a paralyzing current through her systems. His words weren't a confession. They were a verdict, delivered with the weight of centuries. I am fighting because of you. I am destroying your kin's hope for you. The air left her in a shuddering exhale, her head bowed, silvery hair falling forward to curtain her face. She didn't try to hide the tremor that ran through her, a full-body shiver that had nothing to do with the cave's chill. You carry too much, she whispered, her voice frayed at the edges. My guilt, my remorse, you cannot carry from me. It is mine to bear. She finally lifted her gaze, her blue-gray eyes bright with the sheen of unshed tears she didn't have the biological mechanism to produce, yet somehow glistened all the same. You speak of freedom, but freedom built on the bones of everyone else's hope is just another cage. She tried to pull her hand back, not with force, but with a slow, deliberate tension. You want me to have a life. What life is there in a world where the truth breaks everyone else? Where I walk free because you slaughtered the lie I was born from? Her voice cracked. That is not peace. That is just a different kind of war. A quieter one. Her hand slipped from his grasp, falling back to her side as if burned. She took a step back, putting a sliver of space between them, her posture defensive, but her expression utterly vulnerable. I am not worth the collapse of a world, Zero, she breathed, the name a prayer and a curse on her lips. I am one flawed weapon in a legion of lies. Do not make me the reason you become the judge. Become the judge because it is right, not because of me. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of containment that seemed too small to hold the storm inside her. You said you would show me peace. Show me a world where the androids who still believe in find a new purpose. Don't just burn it all down for my sake. Her eyes searched his face desperately. Or else everything you are fighting for will just be another ghost for me to mourn. Zero's hand lowers after she withdrew hers. His gaze turns back to the fire. You asked me to end the lies. To end the war. I told you that YorHa lies to protect androids. But you did not want to continue living the lie. And is why I decided to end the war. End the war. Androids are free. But when they learn they forgot for naught because humans are extinct, that is when chaos will break. Many died for the sake of nobody. That will break the psyche of many. And many will believe they no longer have a purpose. Many will then retire themselves. That is the consequence of telling the truth. Because androids need a purpose to have faith, to have hope, to continue living. 2E listened, the weight of his words pressing down on her like the stone of the cavern itself. He painted the aftermath with stark, brutal clarity, the psychological collapse, the purposelessness, the quiet, mass suicide of a species that had lost its reason to exist. It was the unspoken horror she had pushed to the back of her mind when she tore off her blindfold. You think I don't know that? Her voice was hollow, stripped of all emotion, but a deep, resonant ache. You think I chose this path without understanding the cost. She took a step closer to the fire, as if its heat could thaw the cold dread settling in her core. I have executed androids for less, she said, her gaze fixed on the flames. For asking questions. For doubting. For suspecting. I wiped their memories, their personalities, or ended their lives to protect the lie. I am not ignorant of the chaos the truth brings. She turned to face him, her expression bleak. I have been its instrument. She drew in a shaky breath, the smell of smoke and damp earth filling her senses. But continuing the lie is slower, more insidious death. We are already broken, Zero. We just don't know it yet. We are puppets dancing for an empty throne, bring ourselves up for a god that died millennia ago. She gestured vaguely toward the cave entrance, toward the world outside. That is not purpose. That is programmed madness. Her eyes found his again, blazing with a fierce, desperate conviction. You are not the judge. You are the executioner of a dying dream. And her voice broke. I'm asking you to help me bury it. Not for me. For them she swept her arm out, encompassing the unseen androids beyond their cave. So that when they wake up from the dream, they have a chance, just a chance to build something real from the ruins. Something that isn't based on a ghost. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, as if holding her own shattered pieces together. If the truth breaks them, then we help them bear it. If they lose their purpose, then we help them find a new one. She took a step toward him, her voice dropping to a raw whisper. Zero slowly stands up to face 2E, looking up to her as she was taller than him by centimeters. X would had like you. He would have seen the kindness that you have within, the kindness you try to hide. His neutral expression breaks into a soft smile. X gave himself to save humanity, and is a good thing he is not here. Learning humanity went extinct would had broken him. Only a miracle can bring humanity back. If somewhere existed genetic makeup, humanity can be reborn. But only if there was that. 2E stared down at him, his soft smile a crack in the armor of centuries-old stoicism. The comparison to X the Paragon, the ideal struck her like a physical blow. Kindness? It felt like a foreign substance, a glitch in her programming she couldn't reconcile with the blood on her hands. Her own expression remained guarded, but the harsh lines of it softened just fractionally. Do not mistake desperation for kindness, she murmured, her voice thick. I am not X. I do not have his light. The word felt inadequate. I am just tired of the darkness. She turned her face away, looking back into the depths of the cavern where shadows clung to the rock. The mention of a miracle of genetic material of rebirth was a spark in the void, a dangerous, tantalizing spark. A miracle, she repeated, the word tasting like ash and starlight. A fairy tale for androids who dream of masters. She shook her head slowly. Even if such a thing existed, what then? We resurrect our gods only to kneel again, to hand them a broken world and ask them to fix it. She looked back at him, her gaze searching his face for any sign of naive hope. She found not only a weary, pragmatic acknowledgement of a possibility, it was somehow worse than blind faith. I have buried the hope of humanity's return, she said, her voice firming. I will not dig it up again, not even for a miracle. She took a step back, creating space between them once more, but her posture was less defensive now, more resigned. Our purpose cannot be to wait for a savior that will never come. It must be to save ourselves. She nodded toward the tents, the fire, the humble refuge they'd built. This is the only miracle I can believe in right now. A night without an alarm. A moment of quiet. A partner who does not lie to me. The last word was barely a whisper. Get some rest, Zero, she said, turning her back to him fully, her silhouette a sharp cutout against the firelight. The watch is still mine. And tomorrow we continue. She didn't specify what they would continue. The war? The defiance? The fragile, impossible thing growing between them in the dark. It was all the same, now. 2E0 speaks as he begins to make way to their camp's entrance. I think it's better that you are the one to take rest and let me continue. Your stress and emotional levels have raised. You are mentally exhausted. You did good. Now, let me be the one to cover for you. Then he stops. And I am sorry. With that, he continues making way to their entrance. 2E spun around, her back straightening sharply. My stress levels are within operational parameters, she stated, her voice slicing through the damp air with a brutal edge. But the protest sounded hollow even to her own audio receptors. He wasn't wrong. The emotional cascade from their conversation, the guilt, the fear, the terrifying weight of his purpose had left her core processors feeling overheated, her emotional dampeners strained to their limit. She watched him walk toward the entrance, his silhouette outlined against the faint starlight bleeding into the cave mouth. His apology hung in the air, a gentle pressure against the raw places inside her. For a moment, she stood frozen, the soldier warring with the exhausted being underneath. To stand down, to relinquish watch, it felt like surrender. Like admitting she was fragile. Like trusting him not just with her safety, but with her weakness. Her hands clenched at her sides, slowly uncurled. Zero, she said, his name soft for this time. She didn't follow him, but her posture lost some of its rigid defiance. You're observant. It was as close to an admission as she could manage. She drew a slow, unnecessary breath, a human gesture to center herself. Very well. 1 hour. Then you wake me for the next rotation. She didn't thank him for the apology. She didn't know how. Instead, she turned and walked stiffly toward her tent, each step a conscious decision to yield. As she reached the flap, she paused, glancing back at his back, a dark sentinel against the greater darkness outside. Do not let the fire die out, she said, her command a thin veil over something quieter. Then she ducked inside, letting the fabric fall close behind her, sealing herself in a small, private darkness that felt, for the first time, less like a cage and more like a reprieve. She listened to the sound of his movements settling into a watchful stillness, and only then did she allow her systems to begin a shallow, fragmented rest cycle, her sensor, still half awake, tuned to the rhythm of his presence just outside. End of scene.